The rain had thinned to a cold mist by the time Ruth Bennett stopped the sedan beside the rust-red gate. "There it is," she said. Clara did not ask what she meant. The lane ran straight through waist-high grass, two muddy tracks leading toward a white farmhouse with peeling clapboards. It stood on the left, about 60 yards in, while a red barn sagged farther back on the right. A small packing shed crouched between them. Beyond all three, rows of bare apple trees climbed the low ridge like black writing against the gray sky. Clara stepped out in her olive raincoat and worn brown boots. Wind pushed damp strands of her silver-gray bob against her cheek. She put one roughened hand on the gate and leaned toward the property, as if the answer might become clearer from 6 inches closer. Ruth stayed by the dark sedan, giving her room. One window in the farmhouse held a weak amber light from the inspection lamp Ruth had arranged. Everything else looked wet, empty, and long forgotten. "This belonged to Daniel?" Clara asked. "For nearly 30 years. Clara tightened her hand around the cold metal. 11 days earlier, her stepchildren had told her that after 42 years of marriage, almost nothing in her home belonged to her. Now a lawyer had driven her to a farm her husband had never once mentioned, and was asking her to consider whether this ruined place might become part of what he had left behind. The question Clara could not answer was worse than whether the house was salvageable. What else had Daniel believed she did not need to know? At the funeral, Mark Mercer cried into a folded paper napkin from the church basement. That was the detail Clara remembered most clearly. Not the polished coffin, though she had chosen it. Not the lilies, which smelled too sweet and had left orange dust on the sleeve of her black cardigan. Not even the minister saying Daniel had been a man of quiet devotion, a phrase so polished and incomplete that Clara had nearly turned to see who else he might be talking about. She remembered Mark's napkin because it tore when he wiped his eyes. A small wet piece clung to his cheek, and Clara had reached up automatically to remove it. "Oh," he said, embarrassed. "Thanks." She had been taking care of him in one form or another since he was 23. Elaine stood beside him in a navy dress, holding her purse with both hands. She had Daniel's narrow mouth and his habit of looking toward the door when a conversation became difficult. Twice she began to approach Clara. Twice someone intercepted her with condolences. After the burial, they all returned to the house for ham biscuits, coffee, and casseroles, brought by women Clara knew from the cafeteria, and women Daniel had apparently known from the hardware store. Clara moved through the rooms, picking up paper plates, accepting hugs, and telling people where the bathroom was in the house where she had lived for 40 years. "Sit down," her former assistant manager Doreen Pike told her. "If I sit down, somebody will put a blanket over me. You say that like it's a threat." "It is if it's that yellow one Elaine gave us." Doreen's mouth twitched. The yellow blanket was made of a fabric that generated enough static to light a small town. 5 minutes, Doreen said. "Then you can go back to being indispensable." Clara sat at the kitchen table. Someone had set Daniel's coffee mug beside the sink, the brown one with "World's Okayest Fisherman" printed on it. He had not gone fishing in 14 years. He had not been able to hold the mug safely in the last 6 months. Clara looked away. Across the room, Mark opened a cabinet beneath the television and examined the stereo receiver. He caught her watching. "Just checking the model. Dad said it had been acting up. It works if you give it a minute." "Sure, I was only looking." He closed the cabinet carefully with the solemnity of a man returning a church relic. The first conversation about the will happened 3 days later, at the same kitchen table. Mark arrived at 9 carrying a leather portfolio. Elaine came 10 minutes after him with 3 coffees and an apology about traffic. She handed 1 cup to Clara, who took a sip and discovered vanilla syrup. "I thought you drank it sweet," Elaine said. "That was your father." "Oh." Elaine looked at the cup in her own hand. "Right." Clara set it down anyway. Her body had been accepting whatever people handed it all week. Mark removed several papers from the portfolio and squared them against the table edge. "I hate doing this now," he began. "Then don't," Clara said. He paused. It surprised all three of them. Clara folded her hands. They looked older against the oak tabletop than they had the week before. A burn scar crossed the base of her right thumb from a cafeteria steam tray in 1998. Flour had settled permanently into the fine cracks around her nails, though she had not worked a shift in almost 2 years. Mark cleared his throat. We do need to start probate. There are deadlines. Are there? Yes. Elaine peeled the cardboard sleeve from her coffee cup. Mark has been talking to someone. A lawyer? A friend who went through this with his mother, Mark said. He knows the general process. So not a lawyer. Clara waited. Mark slid the first document toward her beneath a photocopy of Daniel's death certificate. The will was dated May 7th, 43 years earlier, 11 months before Clara married him. Daniel's signature had been stronger then. The D had a large, confident loop she had not seen in decades. The document left the house, accounts, personal property, and all residue and remainder to Mark and Elaine in equal shares. Clara read the relevant paragraph twice. Then she turned the page, though the next page did not improve it. This is the latest one, she asked. The only one we found, Mark said. In the metal box? He glanced at Elaine. Yes. I kept the key to that box in the flour tin, Dad told me. Daniel could barely remember whether it was morning or night during his last year, but at some point he had remembered to tell Mark where Clara kept the key. Elaine reached across the table. Her fingers stopped short of Clara's wrist and came back. I really thought he would have changed it. So did I. He probably meant to. Clara looked at her. For 42 years? Elaine lowered her eyes. Mark leaned forward. Nobody is saying Dad handled it well. But a will doesn't stop being valid because it's old. Did your friend tell you that? He said we shouldn't pretend it doesn't exist. Clara got up and poured the sweet coffee down the sink. Neither of them spoke while she rinsed the cup and set it upside down to drain. What happens to me? She asked. Mark's expression became earnest, which was always when Clara trusted him least. We're not putting you out on the street. The phrase "put you out" made something inside her go very still. Elaine hurried in. Of course not. We'd never do that. Then what are you doing? We need an inventory, Mark said. Eventually, the house will have to be sold. There are expenses, and the proceeds get divided according to Dad's instructions. His instructions from before he met me. Yes, but the refrigerator was bought with my wages. So was the new roof in 2009. I paid the property taxes the year the plant cut his hours. There's a canceled check somewhere for the furnace. Mark exhaled through his nose. Married people contribute to a household, Clara. She stared at him. He heard it a second too late. Elaine closed her eyes. Mark. What? I'm not saying she didn't help. Help, Clara repeated. I mean contribute, that's the word you used. Daniel had always called Mark practical. As a boy, practical had meant he remembered to bring a tire gauge on road trips. As an adult, it meant he could make any selfish decision sound like a safety regulation. Elaine pushed another sheet toward Clara. This isn't final. It just acknowledges that we gave you a copy and that you're willing to cooperate. Clara read the heading, Waiver and Consent. The language below it was denser than Elaine's summary. Clara recognized phrases about notice, rights, and election. She had spent 26 years rejecting food service contracts written by salesmen who smiled too much. She knew when a page was being described more kindly than it had been written. I'm not signing this today. Mark sat back. No one is forcing you. You brought a pen. He looked down. A silver pen lay perfectly horizontal beside the document. Elaine made a sound that might have been a laugh if anyone else had been in the room. Mark gathered the papers with controlled patience. Take a few days, but we do need to move. Insurance is expensive on an unoccupied property. I occupy it. You know what I mean. No, Clara said. I'm starting to think I don't. They left the documents. The next morning, Mark returned with blue painter's tape and a package of small colored stickers. He said he wanted to prevent misunderstandings. He placed a green dot beneath the maple dining table because Elaine wanted it. A red dot went under Daniel's roll-top desk for Mark. He photographed the stereo, the wall clock, the drill press in the garage, and the cast-iron skillet Clara had seasoned every Sunday for 30 years. "That pan was my mother's," she said. Mark checked something on his phone. "Then we'll mark it as disputed." "It isn't disputed. I'm not accusing you of anything. You're putting a sticker on my mother's skillet." He removed the sticker, but only after taking another photograph. Elaine arrived while he was upstairs. She stood in the bedroom doorway holding Daniel's watch, the gold-plated one Clara had given him for their 25th anniversary. "I think he wanted Mark to have this," she said. Clara was stripping the bed. The fitted sheets snapped loose from the corner and struck her wrist. "Did he say that?" "Not exactly." "Then how do you know?" Elaine turned the watch over in her palm. "It's a man's watch." "That's compelling." A blush rose along Elaine's neck. For 1 second, Clara saw the younger woman who used to hide in this house after arguments with her first husband, eating cold meatloaf at midnight while Clara pretended not to notice she had been crying. Then Elaine closed her fingers around the watch. "Mark thinks you should have a lawyer explain the waiver," she said. "So you understand it. Mark thinks that?" "We both do." "Good." Elaine looked relieved. "I'll get one." The relief vanished. Doreen found Ruth Bennett's number through a cousin who had fought with 3 brothers over a lake cabin and still spoke admiringly of Ruth afterward. Her office occupied the 2nd floor above an insurance agency in downtown Jefferson. There was no elevator, only a narrow staircase that made Clara conscious of every joint in her knees. Ruth was in her early 60s, broad-shouldered with iron-gray curls and glasses attached to a beaded chain. She wore a rust-colored jacket over a plain black blouse. Her desk held 2 towers of files, a ceramic crow, and a bowl of peppermints that had fused into one glossy mass. "Don't eat those," Ruth said when Clara looked at them. "They came with the office." "How long ago?" "Previous century, judging by the carpet." Clara sat. Ruth read the will, the waiver, the death certificate, and the notes Clara had made on a yellow legal pad. She asked precise questions without making sympathetic noises. Was Clara's name on the deed? No. Joint accounts? 1 small checking account. Retirement benefits? Modest. Life insurance? A policy mostly consumed by funeral and medical bills. Prenuptial agreement? No. Had Daniel made gifts before death? Not that Clara knew. Had she signed anything since the funeral? No. Good. The word loosened a knot beneath Clara's ribs. Ruth took off her glasses. The will is not the whole story. It matters. It may be valid. But Ohio law does not generally allow a spouse to erase the surviving spouse by forgetting to update 43-year-old paperwork. So the house is mine? I didn't say that. The savings? I didn't say that either. Clara almost smiled. You're not much for comfort. I'm very comforting after I know the facts. Ruth explained that Clara might have several spousal rights and claims, but each had limits. Some choices could exclude others. Timing mattered. Valuation mattered. The house title mattered. The estate's debts mattered. This won't turn into a television inheritance, Ruth said. Nobody discovers a second will in a piano bench. We don't own a piano, then your odds are even worse. For the first time since the funeral, Clara laughed. It came out rusty and brief, but it was hers. Ruth put her glasses back on and reached for Daniel's preliminary asset list. Now let's see what your practical stepson believes exists. She read in silence, making small marks in the margin. House, accounts, vehicle, tools, household property, a narrow parcel on Route 193. Then she stopped. What? Clara asked. Ruth turned 1 page sideways. Daniel owned land in Monroe Township? Not that I know of. 31 acres. Clara shook her head. Ruth opened the county parcel database on her computer. The screen filled with boxes, numbers, and a grainy aerial photograph. She leaned closer, then clicked through 2 more public records. Well, she said. "What is it?" Ruth looked from the screen to Clara's worn brown boots beside the chair. "How do you feel about mud? I've managed a cafeteria after meatloaf day," Clara said. "Mud doesn't scare me. It should. Mud can be expensive." Ruth printed the parcel card, then another page showing the tax history. Daniel had inherited the property with his brother in 1996. His brother's interest had passed to Daniel 7 years later through an ordinary transfer recorded at the courthouse. No mysterious benefactor, no secret last-minute gift. Just a piece of land Daniel had owned outright and apparently ignored. The property address meant nothing to Clara. "Did he ever talk about his parents' farm?" Ruth asked. "Sometimes, mostly about how much he hated picking apples. Did he say what happened to it?" "He said they got out of farming." "That part appears true." Ruth tapped the screen. "The current land use code still identifies an orchard, but that can remain long after the trees stop producing. The assessed value isn't the same as market value. Neither tells us what condition the buildings are in. Mark called it acreage. Mark reduced 31 acres with 3 structures to 1 line on an inventory. Maybe he hasn't seen it. The tax mailing address is his house." Clara looked at her. "That doesn't mean he has done anything improper," Ruth said. "Daniel may have changed the address years ago because Mark handled some paperwork. Taxes have been paid automatically from one of Daniel's accounts. There could be a perfectly dull explanation. You sound disappointed. I prefer dull explanations. They hold up better." Ruth pulled up an aerial image. Even blurred by age and resolution, the property's arrangement was clear. A house near the road, 2 outbuildings, a rectangular patch of open ground, and rows of trees running toward a wooded ridge. The roof of the barn showed a dark strip along one side. "What is it worth?" Clara asked. "I don't know. Could it satisfy what they owe me? We don't know what the estate owes you yet. Could it?" Ruth settled back in her chair. "Possibly. But land is not cash-wearing work boots. It has taxes, insurance, defects. If there's a bad well, failed septic system, damaged foundation, or environmental problem, it may be worth less to you than it appears on paper. If you took it as part of a negotiated settlement, you would take the problems too." Clara studied the photograph. "Why would Mark leave it off?" "He didn't leave it off. He made it sound negligible." "That may be what he believes, or what he wanted me to believe." Ruth's expression did not change. "Those are not always different things." She made 3 phone calls while Clara sat across from her. One was to the county auditor's office. One was to a real estate appraiser who knew agricultural property. The third went to a man named Calvin Morris, whose number appeared beside a handwritten note in an old tax file Ruth had requested electronically. The first call confirmed the records. The second produced an estimate, a warning about November scheduling, and several questions nobody could answer. The third went to voicemail. Ruth left a message identifying herself and asking whether Mr. Morris had current knowledge of the Mercer farm. "Now," she said after hanging up, "we tell Mark's attorney that I represent you and that you will not be signing the waiver. Mark doesn't have an attorney. He will by lunchtime." Clara felt another brief, improper flicker of amusement. Ruth's letter went out by email before Clara left the office. It requested a full accounting, formal appraisal of the real property, copies of account statements, and no disposal of personal property until ownership was resolved. Ruth also stated that Clara remained in lawful possession of the marital residence and was not to be pressured into leaving. The language looked sterner than Ruth sounded. "Will this make them angry?" Clara asked. "Probably. I don't want a war. Then don't start one. But don't disarm yourself to prove you're peaceful." At the bottom of the stairs, Clara's phone vibrated. Mark flashed across the screen. She let it ring twice before answering. "Did you hire a lawyer?" he asked. "Hello to you too. We got some kind of notice." "That sounds like I hired a lawyer. Elaine is upset." Clara stepped beneath the striped awning outside the insurance office. Rain darkened the sidewalk and rattled against the metal frame overhead. Elaine took Daniel's watch out of my bedroom, she said. There was a pause. It was Dad's. I gave it to him. So you want it back? I want people to stop entering my rooms and deciding what counts. Okay, fine. We can talk about the watch, but involving attorneys costs everyone money. You brought me a waiver. It was standard paperwork. Then you shouldn't mind a lawyer reading it. Mark lowered his voice, which meant someone was near him. Clara, I'm trying to handle this responsibly. Dad left instructions. We can't rewrite his intentions because the outcome is uncomfortable. She watched water gather at the curb around a crushed foam cup. Did he intend for me to be homeless? Nobody said homeless. Where did he intend for me to live? We haven't reached that point. You put stickers on the furniture, Mark. That was inventory. You put one under my mother's skillet. I took it off. That doesn't answer the question. He sighed, and in the sound, Clara heard Daniel, not the sick man at the end, but the husband who used to stand in the garage with a wrench in one hand and impatience in the other, convinced that frustration was proof everyone else had become unreasonable. We'll discuss it with the lawyers, Mark said. Yes, Clara replied. We will. She ended the call before he could. Ruth emerged carrying her briefcase and a collapsible umbrella that refused to open. You all right? She asked. No. That's usually the truthful answer. Clara took the umbrella, struck its handle once against the building, and opened it. Ruth looked impressed. Useful woman. The compliment should have pleased her. Instead, it followed Clara all the way home. For 42 years, useful had been the safest thing she could be. Useful people were kept close. They were called first when a meal needed organizing, when an elderly parent needed an appointment, when a washing machine made a bad sound. Clara had made herself useful to Daniel until his last breath. A week after that breath, his children had begun measuring the rooms. Cal Morris returned Ruth's call that evening. Ruth called Clara immediately afterward. He knows the farm, she said. His property borders it on the east. What did he say? That nobody has lived in the house since Daniel's mother went into assisted living. The orchard was leased briefly, then abandoned. Mr. Morris has kept an eye on obvious problems, but he was very clear that he is not a caretaker and has no legal responsibility for the place. Meaning he has chased people away twice, cut a fallen limb off the lane, and shut off the well pump after a pipe burst, but he doesn't want anyone mistaking decency for liability. I like him already. He says the house was sound the last time he entered it, which was 6 years ago. That is not an inspection. He also says one corner of the barn roof leaks badly. Anything good? The land is still there. That's what you say when there's nothing good. It's what I say before we look. Ruth arranged permission through Mark's newly hired probate attorney. Mark objected to Clara visiting without him, then objected to delaying the visit until he was available. His attorney solved the problem by telling him an appraisal would be needed regardless. The rain began before noon on the day they drove east. It flattened the harvested fields and blurred the bare trees along the highway. Ruth's sedan smelled faintly of peppermint and wet wool. A banker's box occupied the back seat beside 2 flashlights, disposable shoe covers, and a clipboard. You travel like a burglary accountant, Clara said. I've met houses that bite. Cal will be there? He's meeting us at 4. We're only looking today. No decisions. I know. You say that like someone intending to make a decision. I'm intending to look. Good. Look meanly. They left the state route for a narrower county road, then turned onto cracked pavement that wound between fields and wooded lots. Clara watched mailboxes pass. Black plastic, green metal, one shaped like a red barn. The houses grew farther apart. Her ears kept expecting Daniel to supply a memory. There used to be a cider stand here. My father got the tractor stuck in that field. That hill was murder in January. But Daniel's voice offered nothing. Ruth slowed beside a leaning mailbox with faded numbers and stopped at the rust-red gate. There it is, she said. Clara had seen the aerial photograph. It had not contained cold or distance. It had not shown how the grass pressed against the fence, heavy with rain, or how the white farmhouse seemed to hold itself upright by habit. The straight lane was deeply rutted. The packing shed's roof bowed slightly in the center. Behind it, bare apple rows tangled into one another as they rose toward the ridge. Ruth had arranged for electrical service to be restored temporarily for the inspection. A lamp placed in the front room cast a small amber square against the afternoon gray. Clara got out. The moment felt familiar before she understood why, like something she had worried through in a dream. She pulled her faded olive raincoat closed over her charcoal cardigan and stepped carefully through the wet gravel. Her brown boots sank at the edge of the lane. She put her hand on the gate. The metal was cold enough to ache. "This belonged to Daniel?" she asked. "For nearly 30 years." Ruth stayed a few paces behind beside the dark sedan, allowing the silence to remain Clara's. There was no welcoming charm in the place. Peeling paint hung from the farmhouse siding. A length of gutter had pulled free near the porch. Several barn windows were broken, and the orchard looked less like a crop than a crowd that had stopped listening. Still, Clara leaned forward. She had spent the past week being told that a house she had cleaned, heated, paid toward, and slept in for 4 decades was somebody else's. This place was neglected and possibly ruinous, but no one had yet explained it away from her. A pickup approached from the opposite direction and turned onto the grassy shoulder behind Ruth's sedan. An older man climbed out wearing canvas coveralls under a brown jacket. He was tall but bent slightly at the neck, as if years among low branches had trained him to duck. "Cal Morris," he called. Ruth raised a hand. Cal joined them at the gate, rain beating on the bill of his cap. He looked at Clara for a long second, not rudely, but with the discomfort of someone searching for a family resemblance he knew he would not find. "You're Dan's wife," he said. "I was." His mouth tightened. "I'm sorry about that." "Did you know him well?" "Knew him young. Less well after he got smart enough to leave." There was no admiration in the word smart. Cal pulled a ring of keys from his pocket. None was oversized or polished. They were ordinary hardware store keys marked with strips of brittle tape. "I put a new padlock on after somebody stole copper from a vacant place down the road," he said. "Daniel said that was fine." "When was that?" Clara asked. 8 years ago, maybe 9. "He came here. Called me." Clara looked toward the farmhouse. "Did he ever ask you to check on it?" "Sometimes." "What did he plan to do with it?" Cal rubbed rain from his eyebrow with one knuckle. Far as I could tell, Dan's plan was to avoid making a plan. That sounded so exactly like her husband that Clara almost resented the stranger for knowing it. Cal unlocked the chain. The gate gave a rusted shriek when he pushed, then stuck halfway in the mud. Clara moved beside him and lifted slightly while he pulled. Together they dragged it open enough to pass. "Don't take that as a good sign," Cal said. "Gate's the cheapest problem here." Ruth retrieved her clipboard. Clara looked down the muddy lane, past the farmhouse on the left, the packing shed in the center, and the barn farther back on the right. "All right," she said. "Show me the expensive ones." Cal went first, placing his boots on the strip of grass between the ruts. Clara followed, though the mud found her anyway. It pulled at one heel with enough force to make her grab the gatepost. "Clay under the topsoil," Cal said. "Holds water. Good for apples, good for sticking tractors." Ruth stepped around the worst of it with the concentration of someone crossing a minefield. She held her clipboard beneath her jacket, which protected the paper while allowing the rest of her to get soaked. The farmhouse grew less forgiving as they approached. Paint had peeled from the south wall in long white curls, exposing gray wood beneath. Moss darkened the porch steps. A plastic bucket sat under the lowest corner of the roof, though whatever leak it had once caught now spilled past it. Clara stopped at the bottom step. The porch ran the width of the house, shallow and plain with square posts and a wooden railing that had lost 2 spindles. Someone had set a metal patio chair beside the door. Its seat was covered in dead leaves. "Don't trust the third board," Cal said. "Which third board?" "The one you'll step on if I don't tell you." He mounted the porch, avoiding a plank near the center. Clara followed his path. Ruth took a red pen from her pocket and wrote porch before she had even reached it. The key resisted twice, then turned. Cal pushed the door with his shoulder. Cold air moved out, carrying the smell of damp wood, dust, and something faintly animal. Mice? Clara asked. Mice are the optimists of the property world, Ruth said. They move in early. Cal shone his flashlight along the baseboards. Small black droppings dotted the floor near the wall. No droppings in the cabinets last spring, he said. That's new. You were inside last spring? Clara asked. Front room only. Storm blew that window loose. I screwed plywood over the outside. The amber inspection lamp sat on the floor beside an extension cord, throwing long shadows up the walls. Its light exposed wallpaper printed with faded green vines. Water had stained the ceiling near the front corner, but the plaster had not fallen. Clara walked to the center of the room and pressed her heel down. The floorboards creaked without shifting. There was no furniture except a braided rug curled along one edge and a narrow wooden stand beneath the window. Dust lay thick enough to preserve Cal's boot prints from his earlier visit. This room feels level, she said. Cal gave her a quick look. Mostly is, mostly isn't level. Northwest corner drops about 3/4 of an inch. Could be settling. Could be sill damage. You'd want somebody underneath who knows what he's looking at. Ruth wrote sills, foundation, in block letters. The dining room opened off the front room through a wide doorway. Its ceiling was intact, though a brown stain spread above the window. The kitchen stood behind it, smaller than Clara expected. Cream-colored metal cabinets lined one wall, their chrome handles spotted with rust. A porcelain sink sat beneath a window facing the packing shed. The linoleum had cracked into islands. Clara opened the cabinet beneath the sink. Careful, Cal said. She pointed to a length of pipe that had split cleanly along one side. Frozen. Years ago. I shut the well pump off after Daniel asked me to check why his electric bill jumped. Water ran under the floor for a while. How long is a while? Couldn't tell you. Clara crouched, ignoring the complaint in her knees. The cabinet base was warped, but the floor beneath it did not give when she pressed with the handle of Cal's flashlight. This whole section may need to come out, she said. Likely. Joists? Don't know. Mold? Probably somewhere. Name me a vacant farmhouse in Ohio without it. Ruth leaned toward the doorway but did not enter. You two are very casual with that word. We're not buying it today, Clara said. We are not buying it any day until someone qualified looks at it. Clara straightened slowly. Her knee popped. Cal pretended not to hear. A narrow pantry beside the kitchen contained empty shelves, glass canning jars, and a calendar from 1997. Clara turned one page with her fingertip. September displayed a photograph of covered bridges. Several dates had been marked in blue ink. Dentist, Spray North Rose, Dan Call. She stared at the last entry. The handwriting was not Daniel's. His mother's, probably. The words did not contain an explanation, only evidence that someone had expected him to telephone. Clara let the page fall back. The downstairs bathroom had a rust-streaked tub and a toilet without water in the bowl. Cal refused to guess whether the plumbing could be restored cheaply. The parlor on the opposite side of the house had better walls but a cracked window. A closed door led to a small bedroom with faded roses on the wallpaper and acorns collected along the sill. Squirrels? Ruth asked. Hope so, Cal said. What's the alternative? Bigger squirrels? Ruth stared at him. He's joking, Clara said. Mostly, Cal replied. The staircase rose steeply from the central hall. Ruth tested the bottom step with one foot. I'm beginning to understand why ranch houses were invented. Upstairs were 3 bedrooms with sloped ceilings and a bathroom added under the eaves. One room smelled strongly of wet plaster. Rain had darkened a seam near the chimney, and a metal basin on the floor held 2 inches of brown water. The main roof? Clara asked. Shingles were replaced in 2013, Cal said. Daniel hired a crew out of Conneaut. Chimney flashing wasn't done right, according to the roofer I use. He repaired the roof? Paid for it anyway. Clara had no memory of a bill that large. Daniel had handled several accounts from his desk, though she had assumed they concerned his old union pension and household insurance. She almost asked why he had spent money on a house he never visited. Then she saw Ruth watching her and understood that neither of them could answer. The second bedroom was dry. So was the third. The floor slanted enough for a marble to have made a decision, but the windows opened and the old wooden frames had not rotted through. Clara stood at the rear window. The packing shed roof lay below, patched with mismatched metal. Past it, the orchard rose in ragged rows. Brambles climbed the lower trunks. Some trees had split under old snow loads, their exposed wood gone silver. Others still held a few shriveled apples. 12 acres, she asked. Just under, Cal said. How many trees? Now? Maybe 600 standing. That doesn't mean 600 worth keeping. What does? Couldn't say without walking it. Some might be old disease-resistant stock. Some are firewood with branches. The barn looked worse from above. A strip of red siding had fallen from its eastern wall, and several sheets of roofing lifted slightly with each gust. Was it always red? Clara asked. Cal put both hands in his jacket pockets. Dan and I painted it one summer. His father paid us by the hour, so yes, it was red for a long, long time. The smile reached Cal's face and disappeared almost at once. What was he like then? Clara asked. Daniel. No, the barn. Cal glanced at her, saw the corner of her mouth move, and nodded in acknowledgement. Less drafty, he said. They went down carefully and exited through the kitchen door. The back step had sunk on one side, forcing Clara to turn her foot. She wrote nothing, but she began keeping a list in her head the way she had once inventoried failing cafeteria equipment. Roof flashing, plumbing, possible floor damage, cracked windows, porch, heating, well test, septic. Every item carried a number she did not know and could not afford to underestimate. The packing shed was the least romantic structure on the property, a low rectangular building with corrugated siding and double doors facing the lane. Inside were a concrete floor, a long sorting table, stacks of collapsed wooden crates, and an old conveyor with a cracked rubber belt. Unlike the farmhouse, it smelled dry. Cal swept his light across the rafters. Roof dipped after a heavy snow. I braced it, but that's temporary. How temporary? 6 years so far. Ruth stopped writing. Mr. Morris. I told Daniel to replace the beam, and he said he'd get to it. Clara looked at the timber brace. 2 stout posts supporting a horizontal beam beneath the sagging roof. The work was plain but competent. You did this yourself? With my foreman. Did Daniel pay you? Cal's shoulders shifted. He mailed a check. That was not an answer to what the repair had cost, but Clara did not press him in front of Ruth. The barn doors had swollen shut. Cal managed to force one open 12 inches before something scraped loudly inside. No farther, he said. Roof section over the north bay is soft. You can look from here. The narrow gap revealed rusted machinery, an empty hayloft, and slats of gray daylight. A green tractor sat near the rear wall with no rear tires. The metal surfaces were filmed with corrosion. Anything usable? Clara asked. Not without money. What kind of money? The kind that makes renting equipment look intelligent. A weathered ladder hung from pegs near the door. Clara could see where rain had blackened the wall beneath the damaged roof. On the drier side stood a workbench littered with jars, bolts, and hand tools. Those would be part of the estate, Ruth said. Those would be part of the rust, Clara replied. Cal closed the door. They followed a flattened path behind the buildings into the orchard. The wet grass rose above Clara's knees in places. Thorny blackberry canes caught her trousers. Cal used pruning shears to cut one free without touching her leg. The first row was a ruin. 2 trees had fallen into each other. Another had a dark hollow at its base, and several bore blackened scars. Fire blight, Cal said. Canker, too. These come out. All of them? Most. The next row was not much better. Clara began to understand how 12 acres could become less valuable than a clean half-acre. Farther uphill, the trunks grew straighter. Cal scraped a small patch of bark with his thumbnail, exposing green beneath. "Alive," Clara said. "So are weeds." He cut one of the shriveled apples open with a pocket knife. The flesh was brown near the core, but pale closer to the skin. He smelled it, then offered it to Clara. She smelled damp leaves and a sharp sweetness. "Jonathan, maybe," he said. "Trees around here got mixed over the years. Could be something his father grafted. How many in this section could produce again? If pruning doesn't shock them, if disease hasn't moved through the whole block, if you spray properly, if deer don't eat the new growth, if late frost doesn't take the blossoms, so you don't know. I know enough not to promise." Ruth had stopped below them where the ground steepened. She was sheltering the clipboard under her jacket again. Clara looked down at the buildings. From this angle, the farmhouse roof seemed broad and mostly straight. The barn looked like it had been losing an argument for years. The packing shed sat firmly between them, homely and potentially useful. "Could one person manage this?" she asked. "No," Cal said. The answer struck harder because it came without hesitation. He folded his knife. "One person could decide what gets managed," he continued. "That's different. Lease the open ground. Mow only what you use. Clear around the buildings. Pick 2 acres of trees, maybe 3, and see what survives. Hire work that needs machines. Leave the rest alone until you can afford a decision. I'm 69. I can count. I'm not climbing orchard ladders all day. Good. Falling is an expensive harvesting method." Clara looked at him. Cal's face remained serious, but his eyes had warmed. "How much?" she asked. "Not to make it pretty, to make the house safe enough to live in." He glanced toward Ruth. "You need an inspector, a well test, septic evaluation, electrician, plumber, and somebody to look under the northwest corner. Furnace might run, might also try to kill you. Your best guess." "My best guess is how people end up angry with me. Give me the number that would make you walk away." Cal rubbed the back of his neck. Rain gathered on his cap and dripped from the brim. "If the foundation's bad, if the septic's gone, and if the plumbing damage reached the joists, you could spend $80,000 before you buy a curtain." The orchard became very quiet around Clara. Ruth lowered her clipboard. Clara's emergency savings would not cover a quarter of that. Her pension and Social Security could support a modest life, not repair a neglected farm while paying to live elsewhere. "And if those things aren't all bad," she asked, "then less. How much less? Enough that the truth matters." Ruth walked uphill toward them, breathing harder than she wanted anyone to notice. "This is why we inspect," she said, "and why we appraise. The farm's defects reduce its settlement value. Clara would not accept it at a number based on somebody's memory of what it used to be." Cal looked between them. "Accept it?" "As part of her lawful spousal claim," Ruth said. "Possibly." "Nothing has been proposed." Cal turned back toward Clara. "You're thinking of living here?" "I'm thinking of finding out whether I could." He looked at the house, then at the orchard he had just declared mostly useless. "You'd be starting with a place that's been losing ground for 28 years. Clara wiped mist from her face with the back of her hand. "So would the place," she said. Cal studied her for a moment, then looked away as if she had said something too private. "We should get out before dark," he said. On the walk back, Clara counted the trees in the least damaged row. She reached 37 before a blackberry cane caught her coat. At the bottom of the hill, she turned and counted again from the opposite direction. 38. "One is dead," Cal told her. "Then why is it standing? Trees don't always receive the news." At the packing shed, he took a measuring tape from his jacket and checked the width of the temporary brace. Ruth photographed the sagging roof, the barn siding, the broken windows, and the porch. Clara photographed nothing. She wanted to see what remained in her mind without a screen deciding where the edges were. Cal switched off the amber inspection lamp before locking the house. The front window went gray and the building became vacant again so quickly that Clara felt as if they had abandoned someone in a waiting room. At the gate, she helped him drag the metal frame back through the mud. Rust came off against her palm in a brown-red streak. "You'll need a tetanus shot just to own this place," Ruth said. "I'm current." "Of course you are." Cal fastened the chain. "If you arrange a real inspection, tell them to call me. The lane gets worse after heavy rain." "Can it be graded?" Clara asked. "Anything can be fixed if you stop asking what it costs." "I'm going to keep asking." "Then yes. Gravel and a crown. Drainage first, or you'll buy the same gravel every spring." Clara nodded, committing drainage to the list in her head. In the sedan, Ruth turned the heat high enough to fog the windows. Clara rubbed her hands in front of the vent. Mud had dried in ridges along her boots, and wet hair clung to the back of her neck. "Well?" Ruth asked. "It needs everything, not everything. It needs all the expensive things." "We don't know that." Clara stared through the windshield at Cal's taillights disappearing down the road. "You want it?" Ruth said. "I want to know if I can want it." "That is not the same question." "No." Ruth wiped a clear circle in the fogged glass with the side of her hand. "Be careful. A neglected property can feel like an insult you know how to answer. That doesn't make it a good investment. You think I want to rescue it because nobody rescued me. I think you have spent a long time proving your value through labor. A house that needs labor may feel more familiar than an apartment with a working roof." Clara turned toward her. Ruth's face remained neutral, but one hand tightened on the steering wheel. "That was rude," she said. "It was." "Was it wrong?" Clara looked back at the gate. "No," she said. "That's what makes it rude." They drove to town in silence broken only by the windshield wipers. At a gas station outside Andover, Ruth bought coffee and a package of powdered donuts. She ate 2 in the parked car and dusted sugar down the front of her rust-colored jacket. "I'd like the record to reflect," she said, brushing at it, "that competence is situational." Clara smiled despite herself. The smile lasted until she reached home and saw Elaine's car in the driveway. Mark's blue stickers were gone from the furniture. Pale squares remained in the dust beneath the dining table and on the back of the wall clock. The house looked as if it had developed small missing teeth. Elaine stood at the kitchen counter folding the yellow blanket. Static crackled each time the fabric touched itself. "What are you doing?" Clara asked. "I thought I'd take this to be cleaned." "Why?" Elaine looked down at it. "It smells like Dad's medicine. So does half the house. I was trying to help. You can help by calling before you come in." Elaine folded the blanket again, though it was already folded. "Mark said Ruth Bennett took you to the farm. News traveled quickly once lawyers were being paid by the hour." "Yes. Why? To look at it." "You could have asked us." "I did ask. Through Ruth. I mean before hiring somebody." Clara removed her raincoat and hung it over a chair. Mud flaked from the hem onto the floor. Elaine noticed, and her gaze moved down to the boots. "You went through the house?" "And the packing shed." "We looked at the barn from the doorway. Is it awful?" "Parts of it." Elaine lowered herself into a chair. "I haven't been there since I was about 20. Dad took Mark and me after Grandma moved out. There were hornets in the upstairs bathroom. There are squirrels now. Still, maybe they're descendants." A reluctant smile touched Elaine's face. "Grandma used to leave pans under the leaks. She had names for them based on the sound. The big roasting pan in the front room was Fred. The image bothered Clara more than it should have. Elaine possessed a version of the farmhouse with voices in it. Clara had only the smell of wet plaster and an entry on an old calendar reminding Daniel to call. "Why didn't your father sell it?" Elaine ran her thumb along a split in the blanket's binding. "He was always going to." "That isn't an answer. It's the only one I have. Every few years Mark would bring it up. Dad would say he was waiting for land prices to improve or that somebody might lease the orchard. Then he'd change the subject. Did Mark handle the taxes? After Dad started missing things, yes. So he knew exactly what was there. He knew about the land. He didn't know the condition. He told Ruth's office it was useless acreage. Elaine shifted in the chair. It may be. Then why does he care that I looked? Because now it feels like you're trying to take something. Clara stared at her. Elaine flinched before Clara said a word. I know how that sounds. Do you? I'm trying to explain, Mark. You've spent 40 years doing that. So have you. The words landed cleanly. Clara turned to the sink and washed the rust from her palm. It took more soap than she expected. In the dark window above the faucet, her face looked pale and blurred. Behind her, Elaine said, I thought Dad had taken care of you. He did take care of me, and I took care of him. That was the marriage. You know what I mean? Yes. I know exactly what everybody means lately. Elaine laid the folded blanket on the table. Mark thinks if you claim part of the estate, it comes out of what Dad wanted us to have. That's mathematically true. He says the house was Mom's before it was yours. The house had never belonged to Elaine's mother. Daniel had bought it after the divorce 2 years before meeting Clara, but facts rarely survived long inside family sentences. And what do you say? Clara asked. Elaine worried at the edge of a fingernail. I say Dad should have fixed the will, but he didn't. So you support Mark. I don't want this to turn ugly. Neither did I. Clara crossed the kitchen, took the yellow blanket from the table, and placed it in Elaine's arms. You gave us this, she said. If you want it, take it. Elaine held the blanket against her chest. I don't. Then leave it. For a second, they stood there connected by the ugly yellow fabric, neither willing to claim it. Elaine released her side first. The blanket dropped onto the table with a soft electrical snap. The formal inspection happened 4 days later. Clara did not attend the first hour because Ruth wanted the inspector to work without an audience, but she arrived as he was emerging from the crawl space in white coveralls streaked with black mud. Foundation's better than the porch, makes you think, he said, removing his respirator. Stones settled at the northwest corner, but I'm not seeing a major failure. Sill has rot in one section. Repairable. Clara waited for the number. He gave her a range that began at 6,000 and ended at 12. The plumber found damage around the kitchen and downstairs bath, but no broken pipes in the walls. The furnace technician described the oil furnace as elderly, inefficient, and offensive to modern sensibilities, then admitted it could probably run safely after a new combustion chamber, cleaning, and vent repair. The roof had several usable years left if the chimney flashing was corrected. The porch roof did not. The well produced water after Cal restarted the pump, but the sample showed bacteria and heavy iron. It needed treatment, retesting, and possibly a new cap. The septic inspector found a sluggish system of uncertain age and recommended further excavation before anyone relied on it. Each answer was better than the worst answer, and worse than the affordable one. Clara sat at the packing shed's long sorting table, while Ruth organized reports into piles. The concrete floor made cold travel through Clara's boots. Cal stood near the doorway drinking coffee from a steel thermos. Essential before occupancy, Ruth said, reading from her notes. Sill repair, plumbing, furnace service, electrical corrections, active leak repair, well treatment, septic work depending on excavation, smoke and carbon monoxide detectors, and enough porch stabilization to enter safely. Windows? Clara asked. Some. Not all. Barn? Not for occupancy. Packing shed beam? Not for occupancy. Ruth totaled the low estimates, then the high ones. The difference between them was nearly $20,000. Cal came closer but did not look at the figures. Numbers breed when you put them in a column. I managed a public school food budget, Clara said. Numbers breed when people call them miscellaneous. She drew a line through cosmetic plaster repair, upstairs bathroom renovation, full exterior paint, barn restoration, and orchard clearing. She circled the well, septic, furnace, plumbing, electrical work, and sill. What about the porch? Ruth asked. Remove the damaged section and build safe steps to one door. The porch can wait. The inspector had given the farmhouse no grace. but he had not condemned it. That mattered more than Clara wanted it to. Ruth received the appraiser's preliminary call while they were still seated at the table. She walked outside for privacy, then returned with rain sparkling on her glasses. As is, value will likely fall between $135,000 and $155,000, she said. He needs comparable sales before finalizing. Clara's stomach dropped. It was too valuable to dismiss and too damaged to accept without cash she did not have. Cal screwed the cap onto his thermos. Land carries most of that. Which means repairs don't buy themselves, Clara said. No. Ruth sat across from her. Your total spousal claim may support proposing the farm plus a smaller cash component, but Mark and Elaine will argue over every valuation, and you would still be giving up liquidity in exchange for risk. Clara looked past her through the open packing shed doors. The farmhouse stood pale under the low sky. Beyond it, the rust-red gate waited at the end of the muddy lane. "What would you tell me if you weren't my lawyer?" she asked. "That I'm glad I'm not the one who has to decide. Comforting again. I'm improving." Cal moved toward the door, then stopped. "My south field touches your open acreage," he said. "If the soil test is decent, I'd lease 6 acres. Not as a favor. It would save me turning equipment on the road." "How much?" He named a yearly figure. It was modest. It would cover the property taxes and little else. Clara wrote it at the bottom of Ruth's page anyway. For the first time, one number on the farm was not a cost. Clara carried that number home on a sheet spotted with packing shed dust. She set it beside her own checking balance, pension statement, Social Security estimate, property tax history, insurance quote, and the repair ranges Ruth had copied from the inspection reports. Then she sharpened a pencil and began making the farm disappoint her on paper. At 11 that night, it had failed. At midnight, she changed the assumed septic cost from the lowest estimate to the midpoint and made it fail more honestly. By 1, she had removed any orchard income for the first 2 years, added a 20% repair contingency, and given herself a monthly grocery allowance so severe that Doreen would have accused her of planning to survive on crackers and spite. The farm still did not quite work. It came close enough to be dangerous. Clara sat back from the dining table. Mark had returned the following afternoon and removed the blue stickers after Ruth's letter reached his attorney. But one remained beneath the edge where he had missed it. Clara worked it loose with her thumbnail. The maple table had been bought at an estate sale during her 5th year of marriage. It was scratched, heavy and too large for the room. She and Daniel had tied it to the roof of their station wagon with clothesline because neither of them had owned proper rope. Halfway home, the line began to whistle. Daniel had pulled onto the shoulder and insisted the table was moving, while Clara insisted the car was. She could still hear them laughing beside the highway. The memory arrived whole, warm at first and then unbearable. She rolled the blue sticker between her fingers until the adhesive turned gray. Daniel had not been a villain. That would have been easier. He had been funny and stubborn and frightened by hospitals. He brought Clara coffee in bed every Sunday until his hands began to shake. He rubbed her feet after double shifts and left every difficult piece of paperwork until tomorrow. He loved her in hundreds of daily ways and had failed her in the one place where daily love needed to become a decision. Clara opened the old household ledger she kept in the buffet drawer. Daniel used to tease her about the entries. May 2009, roof deposit $4,800. June 2009, roof balance $6,225. Beside each payment, Clara had marked which account supplied it. Her cafeteria wages had covered more than half. She turned forward. Property taxes, furnace repair, Daniel's dental bridge, Elaine's loan after her divorce, repaid except for the final $1,200 Daniel had told Clara to forget. Mark's transmission, co-payments, prescription changes, a hospital bed rented for the downstairs parlor. None of it transformed the old will. Ruth had been clear about that. Marriage was not an invoice Clara could submit at the end. Still, the numbers proved that the house had never supported her by itself. She had helped support it. At 9 the next morning, Doreen arrived with a plastic grocery bag and the expression of a woman expecting resistance. "I brought breakfast." I ate. "You drank coffee and looked at toast. There was butter." Doreen removed 2 egg sandwiches from the bag and placed one over Clara's latest budget. She was 64, compact and quick, with copper-colored glasses and a tendency to wear earrings shaped like food. Today's were tiny silver whisks. "What is this?" she asked. "A 3-year projection. Where are you going to live? The Pentagon." Clara handed her the inspection summary. Doreen read the first page standing up, then sat without being invited. "Septic system," she said. "That's where dreams go to die. So I've learned. Can you afford it? Not without some cash in the settlement. Even then, I'd have to live small." "You already live small." "Smaller." Doreen looked around the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. Daniel's fisherman mug still sat on the counter because Clara could not decide whether using it was comforting or grotesque. "Do you want my opinion?" Doreen asked. "Not if it's sensible. I was going to say Mark is a jackass. That's not new information." "No, but it's verified." Clara pushed the budget toward her. "Look for what I missed." Doreen had managed cafeteria purchasing beside Clara for 17 years. She knew how to find a false economy from across the room. She ate her sandwich, wiped her fingers, and began circling numbers. "You have nothing for moving. I can rent a truck. A truck does not lift a sofa. I may not have a sofa. Storage? I don't want to pay to store things I don't use. Temporary housing while the house is repaired?" Clara pointed to a 6-week line item. Doreen crossed it out. "Make it 12. 12 weeks doubles it." Yes, time has that property. She found no allowance for replacing the water heater, no money for mowing equipment, too little for fuel, and nothing for legal fees beyond Ruth's initial retainer. When she finished, the farm failed by $14,000. Clara stared at the total. Doreen reached across and covered the figure with her hand. "This doesn't mean no. It spells it convincingly. It means this version is no." "What other version is there? One where you don't fix everything at once. One where your settlement includes enough money. One where the lease pays more. One where you rent out part of the ground. Or one where I take the cash I can get, rent a clean apartment, and buy toilet paper without a 3-year projection. That is also a version." Clara wished Doreen would dismiss it. Instead, her friend uncovered the total and let it remain. Ruth called before lunch. She had completed a preliminary calculation of Clara's available spousal claims based on the estate records produced so far. The range was wide because account values and property classification still needed confirmation, but there was enough room to make a serious proposal. "Farm at independently appraised value," Ruth said. "A cash component for immediate habitability work, your personal property, a reasonable selection of household furnishings, and time to relocate. How much cash?" Ruth named a starting demand that made Clara grip the phone tighter. "They'll never agree. It is a proposal, not a prediction." Where does that leave Mark and Elaine? With the house, the remaining accounts, the vehicle, and most of the personal property, subject to final values and debts, they'll say, "I'm taking their inheritance." They've already said that. Clara looked at the ledger lying open beside the budget. "Send it." Mark called 23 minutes after Ruth's proposal reached his attorney. Clara did not answer. He called again. She turned the phone face down. On the third call, she switched it off and finished her egg sandwich cold. His counter-proposal arrived through Ruth 2 days later. Mark and Elaine would transfer the farm at a value $35,000 above the appraiser's midpoint. There would be no additional cash. Clara could keep her clothes, personal effects, kitchenware she could prove had belonged to her before marriage, and the bedroom furniture. She would vacate the house within 30 days of court approval. "He found the property worthless until you asked for it," Ruth said. "Now it's apparently a country estate." Clara read the page again. "Kitchenware I can prove. We'll reject that language. He watched me cook for his father in that skillet. This isn't about cookware, I know." Ruth took the counter-proposal back. They're using a higher farm value because every dollar assigned to it reduces what else you receive. We have an appraisal. They have indignation. Is indignation admissible? Only at family dinners. Clara looked toward the office window. A delivery van was blocking traffic below while two drivers argued with gestures. What if I accept the farm without cash? No. The firmness startled her. You asked what I thought. I asked what happens. What happens is you enter ownership underfunded. One bad system failure forces you to borrow against the property, sell under pressure, or go without something essential. You would be trading their urgency for yours. I have savings. You have savings appropriate for a retired woman, not a damp agricultural property. Clara folded the counter-proposal along its existing crease. Then I need income the farm can produce before the orchard produces anything. Correct. Cal answered on the second ring when she called that afternoon. I checked average lease rates, Clara said after identifying herself. Hello to you too. Your offer is high. Field connects to mine. Not high enough to be suspicious. High enough to be neighborly. I charge extra for being accused of decency. I won't accept a favor disguised as rent. There was a pause filled by the low mechanical sound of something running near him. All right, Cal said. What will you accept? Clara named a lower cash figure based on county averages. That doesn't help your budget. How do you know about my budget? You ask questions like a woman with columns. She ignored that. Lower rent, 3-year term, annual adjustment tied to the county average. You maintain the access lane used by your equipment. You plow from the county road to the packing shed when snowfall exceeds 4 inches. Any chemical use gets documented. No handshake arrangement. You always this friendly? I can add a holiday card. Cal laughed, a dry sound like leaves moving. What do you want with the orchard? He asked. I don't know yet. Then write that I have no rights to the trees, fruit, or packing shed. I was going to. Write access hours, too. You may not care now, but you'll care the first time a tractor wakes you before daylight. They spent 20 minutes disagreeing over drainage, fencing, liability, and whether Cal's equipment could cross the yard during wet weather. Clara wrote everything down. You need a lawyer to draft it, he said. I have one, I noticed. Before they hung up, he added, there might be another 4 acres a hay grower could use if you clear the fence line. Not worth much the first year. And I know a man who mows neglected ground. How much? I'll ask. Don't ask for a favor. Clara. What? Some people quote fair prices without needing to be supervised. That hasn't been my month. He was quiet for a beat. Fair enough. Ruth liked the lease structure and disliked Clara negotiating it before owning the property. She turned the terms into a non-binding letter of intent, contingent on settlement, soil conditions, and insurance. The possible rent would not make the farmhouse affordable by itself, but it changed the budget from wishful thinking to a narrow plan. Clara revised her 3-year projection again. She assumed 12 weeks of temporary housing, the higher legal fees, no income from apples, and the full septic replacement estimate. Then she reduced her own monthly allowance by $50. She stared at the figure and put the $50 back. Ruth had told her not to build a future that required her to become invisible inside it. The next round of negotiations took place in a conference room at Mark's attorney's office. Mark sat across from Clara in a gray suit he wore to sales meetings. Elaine sat beside him, shoulders tense beneath a green sweater. Ruth placed the appraisal, inspection summary, and proposal in front of her. Mark did not touch them. This farm idea makes no sense, he said. You've never run an orchard. I'm not proposing to run 12 acres of orchard. You're 69. I continue to be aware of that. You'll sink money into it, realize you can't manage, and sell it in a year. Then why are you valuing it like a place I should be grateful to receive? His attorney shifted in his chair. Elaine looked down. Mark's jaw tightened. Because land has value whether you can use it or not. So did 42 years, Clara said. Nobody moved. She had not planned the sentence. It sat between them without volume or decoration. Mark looked at her as if she had broken an agreement to keep certain truths impolite. Finally, Elaine spoke. What cash amount would make the farm workable? Mark turned sharply. We discussed this. I know what we discussed. Her voice trembled, but she did not take the question back. Clara looked at Ruth. Ruth opened the inspection report to the page marked Essential Work and slid it across the table. Mark pulled the report toward him and scanned the first page. This is worst-case pricing. It includes ranges, Ruth said. The low figures are in the left column. The house has stood for over 100 years. Clara looked at him. So has the problem with that sentence. His attorney pressed 2 fingers against his lips, hiding either a cough or a smile. Elaine read farther than Mark had. She turned to the well report, then the septic findings. How much do you actually need? Need isn't a clean number, Clara said. The septic excavation could find a repairable line or a failed system. The sill could cost $6,000 or $12,000. If I take the farm, I take that uncertainty. You'd also own 31 acres, Mark said, and you'd own the house you've been labeling. I haven't touched anything since your lawyer sent the letter. You sent a waiver before I buried the flowers. I brought paperwork 3 days after the funeral because bills don't pause for grief. No, Clara said, but decent people can. The conference room went still. Mark's attorney suggested a short break. Ruth accompanied Clara into the hallway, where a humming vending machine offered 6 empty rows and 1 package of peanut butter crackers. Don't buy those, Ruth said. They may be related to my peppermints. Clara leaned against the wall. Her pulse beat hard in her throat, though she had barely raised her voice. I shouldn't have said that. It was relevant. It wasn't strategic. Not everything true is strategic. Ruth adjusted her glasses. But from this point forward, let me carry the sharper objects. The conference room door opened. Elaine came out alone. Can I talk to Clara? Ruth looked at Clara, received a nod, and moved several feet away. Not far enough to be excluded, only far enough to charge for not listening. Elaine folded her arms. Mark isn't trying to make you homeless. He keeps saying that. He thinks you have more money than you do. Why? Because you always handled things. The answer was so simple. Clara had no reply ready. Elaine glanced at the closed door. When Dad needed the bathroom redone, it got redone. When the roof leaked, somebody came. When his prescriptions changed, they appeared in the plastic case. Mark thinks that means there's money somewhere. There was me somewhere. I know. Do you? Elaine's eyes filled, then hardened against it. I know you took care of him. You say it like a compliment you're trying not to price. That's not fair. No. This is the week we all discovered Fair has paperwork. Elaine looked toward Ruth, who was reading the back of the cracker package through the glass. How much of your money went into the house? Elaine asked. I don't know exactly. Mark says Dad paid the mortgage. The mortgage was gone before I married him. I paid toward everything after. Sometimes half, sometimes more. Can you show that? The question carried doubt, but not only doubt. Clara thought of her ledger on the dining table, Daniel's medical co-payments in her neat handwriting, the hospital bed in the parlor, the roof deposit beside the letter C for Clara's account. Yes, she said, I can show enough. When they returned, Ruth proposed that both sides exchange revised numbers after reviewing household contributions and the estate's updated account statements. Mark objected that Clara's contributions during marriage had no bearing on Daniel's will. They bear on settlement, Ruth said. They bear on the credibility of any claim that Mr. Mercer alone maintained the marital home. And they bear on whether your side wants to spend months disputing statutory rights that exist independently of the will. Mark looked at Clara. Are you threatening to sue us over groceries now? No, she said. I'm refusing to sign away rights because you find them inconvenient. The meeting ended without agreement. At home, Clara copied ledger pages at the public library. She did not copy everything. Some entries felt too intimate to place in a lawyer's file. Daniel's incontinence supplies, the second-hand lift chair he had refused until he could no longer stand without it, the grocery run on their anniversary when nausea allowed him only ginger ale and crackers. She copied major repairs, property taxes, utilities, insurance, medical expenses, and deposits from her wages. She added bank records where she had them. The result did not show a woman owed repayment for every dollar. It showed a household built from 2 incomes and maintained, especially at the end, by one person's attention. Ruth sent the packet with a restrained cover letter. Elaine came to the house that evening while Clara was sorting kitchen drawers. This time she knocked. Clara opened the door but did not invite her in immediately. Elaine waited on the porch with both hands visible, as if approaching a nervous animal. "I brought the watch back," she said. The gold-plated watch lay in her palm. Clara's throat tightened. "Why?" "Because you gave it to him. He wore it. It was his." "That isn't the point." "No," Clara said. "Apparently it never is." Elaine stepped inside after Clara moved aside. She placed the watch on the hall table. "Mark saw the ledgers. I assumed he would. He says they don't change the will. They don't. He says you're trying to embarrass us." "Were you embarrassed?" Elaine removed her coat but kept it draped over her arm. "There was a payment to me. The loan after your divorce. You wrote balance forgiven by D. Your father told me to let the rest go. He never said you supplied the money. It came from our joint account. Most of that month's deposit was mine." Elaine sat at the kitchen table. The ugly yellow blanket had migrated to the back of a chair and looked brighter in the darkened room. "I remember coming here," she said. "I remember you making meatloaf at midnight because I hadn't eaten. I remember Dad saying he'd take care of everything. He meant it when he said it." "That doesn't help much." "It helps me sometimes." Elaine picked at a place on the table where the finish had worn thin. "Mark wants me to sign a statement saying Dad maintained the house and you were allowed to live here." Clara's hands went cold. Allowed? His attorney didn't use that word. Did Mark? Elaine nodded. "What will you do?" "I told him I wouldn't sign it." Relief came with suspicion beside it. Clara hated that the two had become so difficult to separate. "Why not?" "Because it isn't true. That hasn't stopped him. I'm not Mark, no. You just support him whenever kindness gets expensive." Elaine closed her eyes. The words were crueler aloud than they had been in Clara's mind. She almost apologized. Then she remembered the waiver, the stickers, and the watch removed from her bedroom. Elaine stood. "I deserved some of that," she said. "Not all." She put on her coat. At the door, she looked back. "I'm going to tell him we settle. The farm at the independent appraisal. Enough cash for the necessary repairs, not the full amount Ruth asked. You get time to leave and whatever personal things are actually yours." "The table?" Elaine's gaze dropped to it. "Grandma Mercer gave Dad money for that table. No, Daniel and I bought it at an estate sale. We tied it to the station wagon. Mark says it belongs with the house." Of all the things Elaine had said, that nearly made Clara laugh. "Of course he does. I can't win every argument for you. I didn't ask you to. No, you only notice the ones I lose." Elaine left. The watch remained on the hall table, ticking faintly. The revised offer came the following week. The farm was valued at $145,000, near the center of the independent appraisal. Clara would receive $36,000 in cash from the estate, enough to cover the low to middle range of essential work when combined with part of her savings. She could remain in the house for 10 weeks after court approval. Her personal clothing, papers, jewelry, cafeteria retirement gifts, her mother's cookware, the bedroom set, and a specified list of household items would be hers. The maple table was not on the list, neither was the fisherman mug. Clara added the mug. Mark accepted it without comment. Ruth reviewed every page with her. The agreement did not guarantee that the farm was habitable. It did not force Mark or Elaine to cover overruns. Clara would accept the property in its present condition after inspections. She would assume future taxes, insurance, repairs, and liability. The cash would not stretch to the barn, full porch, exterior paint, or broad orchard restoration. If the septic system needs full replacement and the sill reaches the top estimate, you'll use most of your emergency fund, Ruth said. I know. If the furnace fails after that, you will have a problem. I know. If the lease falls through, I know, Ruth. Ruth removed her glasses and set them on the desk. Without them, her face looked less guarded. I need to hear that you know this is not the part where the music swells. Clara looked at the signature line. The farm was not compensation for 42 years. No property could convert a marriage into a balanced account. It was 31 wet acres, a damaged house, an uncertain septic system, a barn she could not yet afford to save, and trees that might never produce a saleable apple. It was also a place Mark had not stickered. I know exactly what it is, Clara said, as closely as anybody can before the ground is opened. Ruth slid the pen toward her. Clara signed. Court approval and transfer documents took longer than Mark had predicted when he wanted her gone quickly. December hardened the mud at the farm, then softened it again. Contractors produced schedules that shifted with weather and other jobs. Clara paid deposits only after Ruth reviewed the terms. The lease with Cal became a formal 3-year agreement, with the access, plowing, chemical records, and orchard exclusions written plainly. Cal signed at Ruth's office and frowned at each initial box. You charge by the signature? He asked. By the complaint, Ruth said. You're becoming a premium client. Clara signed last. The farm deed could not be recorded until the settlement order was entered, but the agreement allowed essential stabilization to begin. The sill carpenter scheduled January. The plumber promised to start after New Year's. The septic contractor still refused to promise anything until excavation. On the morning the court approved the settlement, Ruth called Clara before 9. It's entered, she said. The farm transfers under the agreement. The cash distribution should follow after final processing. Clara sat on the edge of the bed she had shared with Daniel. That's all? That is never all. But it's the part where I tell you congratulations and then immediately remind you to bind the insurance. I already did. Of course you did. After the call, Clara remained seated. Downstairs, the clock Mark claimed for the estate chimed the quarter hour. The sound moved through rooms that were no longer hers to maintain. Around her stood 3 half-filled boxes labeled clothes, papers, and bathroom. She had won nothing simple enough to feel like winning. Still, when she drove to the farm that afternoon, the key on her ring opened the gate without Cal beside her. Clara pushed it through the shallow, frozen mud and stood alone at the beginning of the lane. The farmhouse window was dark. She walked down and switched on the amber lamp herself. The light did not improve the room. It showed the water stain, the mouse droppings, and the curled rug with greater confidence. Clara stood in the doorway, breathing air that had not yet learned her. Then she took a notebook from her purse and began at the front wall. She wrote what she could see, what she needed to ask, and what could wait. The distinction mattered. Peeling wallpaper could wait. The loose outlet near the baseboard could not. A cracked pane in the parlor could be boarded for winter, but the bedroom window that would not latch had to close. She marked the front room floor stain with a pencil, dated it, and measured its width so she would know whether the leak spread. The house made small sounds around her. A tick in the wall, a soft scrape overhead, wind pressing against the plywood on the front window. At the pantry, she stopped before the old calendar. Dan Call remained written on the September square. Clara closed the pantry door. The first contractor arrived 3 days later, 40 minutes early, while Clara was still sitting in Ruth's sedan finishing coffee. His name was Walt Dombrowski. He had a white mustache, a bad left shoulder, and no interest in discussing either. He crawled beneath the house with his apprentice, emerged covered in dirt, and confirmed the sill damage was limited to one section beneath the kitchen. Good news, he said. How much good news? He named a figure closer to the high estimate than the low. That's expensive news. It's less expensive than bad news. Walt's crew opened the kitchen floor, supported the wall, removed the rotted timber, and fitted treated lumber into a space Clara would never see after the floor was repaired. She visited every afternoon, took photographs, and recorded payments in a new ledger labeled Farm. On the second day, Walt found her sweeping plaster dust near the doorway. "You don't need to do that," he said. "You charge by the hour. My apprentice sweeps. Your apprentice is carrying lumber." Walt considered this. "Don't lift anything. I'm sweeping." People who say they're sweeping are often thinking about lifting. She put both hands visibly on the broom. The septic excavation began with a machine chewing a dark wound into the frozen yard. Clara stood beside Cal while the contractor exposed the line and distribution box. "Pipes crushed here," the contractor said, pointing into the trench. "Boxes cracked. Tank itself may be serviceable." "May?" Clara asked. "We pump it, inspect it, then I tell you." She waded through the pumping, inspection, and conversation about soil. The tank passed. The line and box did not. The repair cost less than full replacement and more than Clara had allowed for the middle estimate. She approved it after Ruth reviewed the change order. That evening, she drew a line through exterior paint for the first 2 years. The plumber restored water to the downstairs bathroom and kitchen. The water heater failed its pressure test and had to be replaced. Clara had not budgeted for replacement until Doreen forced the line onto the spreadsheet. She called Doreen from the hardware store. "You may gloat for 30 seconds, Clara said. "I don't time my gloating. You were right about the water heater. I'm going to need longer than 30 seconds. The well was chlorinated and retested. Bacteria cleared. Iron remained high enough to stain sinks and give the water a metallic taste, but treatment could be staged. Clara chose a basic filter and postponed the larger system. The furnace technician worked for 4 hours, replaced the combustion chamber, repaired the vent, and placed 2 carbon monoxide detectors without being asked. "It's safe now," Clara said. "It's operating within range now. That is not the same sentence. No heating sentence is forever." He gave her his card and instructed her to call if the flame changed color, the unit began rumbling, or she smelled exhaust. Clara taped the card inside the utility room door. By the end of January, the front room and downstairs bedroom could be heated. The kitchen had running water and a plywood patch where the damaged floor had been. The bathroom worked. Half the outlets bore strips of red tape because the electrician had disconnected unsafe circuits upstairs. The farmhouse was not ready. It was ready enough to become tempting. Clara's temporary rental was a furnished 1-bedroom above a dental laboratory. The couch was upholstered in brown fabric patterned with orange diamonds, and the bedroom window faced a brick wall. It cost by the week. Every Thursday, Clara wrote a check and felt the farm lose money while she slept elsewhere. Ruth refused to let her move too early. Water, heat, sanitary system, safe entry detectors, and a locking door, she said. "Those are not luxuries. I have all of those. You have electricians still working. Downstairs is done. You have a porch with a missing section. I use the kitchen door." Ruth peered at her over her glasses. "You argued this thoroughly in advance." "Yes." "Fine. Ask the inspector, not me." The inspector approved limited occupancy with the upstairs circuits off, the front porch closed, and temporary safe steps at the kitchen door. Clara scheduled her move for the end of February. First, she had to leave the other house. Mark hired movers for the estate furniture on a Monday without asking whether Clara would be there. 2 men carried the roll-top desk and wall clock out while she packed dishes in the kitchen. The clock did not chime after they removed it. Its absence had a shape. Mark stood in the dining room checking items against his phone. "The bedroom set is yours," he said. "The movers can take it to the farm if you want. We'll deduct that portion from the estate moving cost. I hired my own movers." "You didn't need to." "I did." He looked toward the table. "Elaine says you're upset about this. I'm upset about many things. It keeps me flexible." "Clara, it's a table." "Yes." "You have nowhere to put it." "I have a dining room." "At the farm?" She closed the box of dishes and wrote, kitchen fragile across the top. Mark followed her to the counter. You understand we're not selling the house to punish you. I understand you want the money. Dad left it to us. So, you've mentioned. He worked 37 years at the plant. I know. I washed 37 years of grease out of his shirts. Mark's mouth tightened. There it is again. What? This idea that everything you did has to be counted. Clara looked at him. You counted the skillet. He put the phone in his pocket. For a second, weariness replaced the managerial certainty in his face. He looked older than she had allowed him to become. I lost my father, too, he said. I know. You act like we showed up because he died and there was money. You showed up with stickers. I didn't know what else to do. Clara believed him. That was the irritating part. You could have asked whether I was all right. I assumed you weren't. That isn't the same thing. No, he said quietly. A mover appeared in the doorway and asked whether the table went. Mark's uncertainty vanished. Yes. Clara kept one hand on the box until the table passed through the front door. The legs had been removed, and without them it looked smaller, just a scratched slab of maple carried sideways into winter. Elaine came after the movers left. She brought packing paper, tape, and sandwiches from a deli Clara liked. I'm not here to discuss anything, she said. Good. They worked in the kitchen. Elaine wrapped the fisherman mug in 3 layers of paper without remark. Clara packed her mother's cast-iron skillet in a separate box and wrote mine on every side. Subtle, Elaine said. I considered hiring a guard. They found 6 lids without matching containers, a drawer full of expired coupons, and a plastic corn cob holder shaped like a tiny ear of corn. Dad hated corn on the cob, Elaine said. He hated getting it between his teeth. He said it was food designed by dentists. Clara laughed before she could stop herself. Elaine did too. For half a minute, they stood beside the open cabinet laughing at Daniel's unreasonable hatred of corn. Then Elaine began to cry. She turned toward the sink, one hand over her mouth. Clara waited. I'm so angry at him, Elaine said. The confession was muffled against her palm. So am I. I don't want to be. Neither do I. Clara did not embrace her. Elaine did not ask. They stood shoulder to shoulder until the moment passed, then wrapped the corn holders in paper because neither could decide who should throw them away. On Clara's last morning in the house, she walked through every room. The walls showed pale rectangles where pictures had hung. The bedroom contained only dust and 2 wire hangers. In the parlor, faint marks remained on the floor where the hospital bed had stood. She expected some final sentence to arrive. Nothing did. Clara locked the door and placed her key in an envelope for Ruth. Mark had asked her to leave it on the counter. She did not trust him to notice it among empty rooms. Doreen supervised the farm move, wearing a knit cap and her silver whisk earrings. Cal had plowed the lane according to the lease, though less than 4 inches of snow had fallen. You violated the contract, Clara told him. Invoice me. The movers carried the bedroom furniture through the kitchen because the front porch remained closed. A mattress barely cleared the doorframe. The dresser did not. They removed its mirror, then one drawer, then the kitchen door itself. House is fighting back, Doreen said. It's testing our commitment. Mine is low. By evening, boxes lined the front room walls. Clara's bed stood in the downstairs room. A card table and 2 folding chairs occupied the dining room. The fisherman mug sat beside the sink. Doreen stocked the refrigerator. Cal checked the furnace twice. Both lingered until Clara told them she was capable of surviving one night without supervision. After their taillights disappeared, the farmhouse changed. It no longer felt vacant. It felt enormous. Clara locked the kitchen door, tested the carbon monoxide detectors, and walked the downstairs rooms with a flashlight. The furnace clicked on beneath the floor. Water moved somewhere in the pipes. The refrigerator hummed. She ate soup at the card table, washed 1 bowl, and placed it in the drainer. At 9, wind began striking the house in hard gusts. Clara heard a metallic bang from the direction of the barn. She pulled on her boots and coat but stopped at the kitchen door. Night. Ice. Damaged barn. Useful people knew the difference between courage and poor judgment. She called Cal. He answered sleepily. What happened? Something metal is loose at the barn. Can you see it? Not from here. Then it'll be loose until daylight. The banging continued through the night, irregular and violent. Clara slept in pieces. At dawn, she found a sheet of barn roofing folded backward like a torn lid. Another hung from one corner, striking the rafters whenever the wind rose. Cal arrived with 2 workers and refused to let Clara near the structure. They removed the hanging sheet and covered the exposed section with a heavy tarp fastened from the sound side. This won't last all winter, he said. It only has to last until I can decide what not to repair. Cal looked at the battered roof, then at her. First night? He asked. Yes. Place has timing. Clara pulled her coat tighter. The wind blew through the barn opening and carried the smell of wet timber across the yard. In her new ledger, under the cost of moving and before the first night's groceries, she added a line for emergency barn stabilization. The farm had welcomed her by presenting a bill. Clara paid it from the contingency column and crossed out the upstairs bathroom until the following year. For 3 weeks, she lived almost entirely between the kitchen, front room, downstairs bedroom, and the narrow path connecting them. The closed staircase wore a strip of red tape across the bottom, not because the stairs were unsafe, but because the disconnected outlets and cold rooms above offered nothing worth heating. At night, the old furnace woke with a thud that made her sit upright in bed. The technician returned, listened to it, and said the sound was unpleasant but normal. Normal for what? Clara asked. A furnace or a coal mine? For this furnace. He adjusted the burner and charged her only for the service call. The thud softened into a grumble. She learned which window rattled in a west wind and which kitchen cabinet door opened by itself when the furnace came on. She learned that the morning sun reached the dining room for exactly 19 minutes before disappearing behind the packing shed. She learned that iron-rich water left pale orange marks if she did not wipe the sink dry. The house's inconveniences multiplied, but so did its small proofs of life. Her towels stayed warm on the radiator. The bedroom floor remained dry after hard rain. The carbon monoxide detectors stayed silent. On the first morning she woke without remembering where she was, she lay still and listened to the unfamiliar quiet until a truck changed gears on the county road. Then she got up and made coffee in Daniel's fisherman mug. The mug's handle faced the wrong way for her left hand. It always had. She used it anyway. Her winter heating bill arrived in a white envelope and made her say a word Daniel used to object to, until his illness expanded his vocabulary. She lowered the thermostat 2 degrees, added a thick curtain across the central hall, and moved the card table closer to the front room radiator. Cal found her there one afternoon, wearing fingerless gloves, while entering expenses into the farm ledger. "You planning to freeze profitably?" he asked. "I'm identifying where the oil went. Up the chimney. That's not sufficiently itemized." He had come to deliver the signed soil test results for the 6 leased acres. The ground was suitable for the rotation he planned, with lime recommended before planting. Under their agreement, he would pay for amendments specific to his crop and document them. Clara checked the acreage calculation against the county map, then checked the annual rent. "You use 6.4 acres, she said. "That's what the measured field came to. Our letter of intent said 6. The lease says actual tillable acreage after measurement. It also says the first-year rent is based on 6, unless both parties initial an amendment." Cal reached for the paper. "I thought we did." They had not. The difference favored Clara by a little over $200. "You owe me less," she said. He read the clause, rubbed his jaw, and sat across from her. "You could have signed the payment receipt and spent a year waiting for you to find the error. Might not have. You would. What makes you so sure? You bring a thermos from home so you don't pay gas station prices. You'd find $200. His expression changed. Not quite a smile. "All right. We amend it to 6.4 and calculate correctly. Next year. First year stays at 6. Why? Because you're paying for lime. That was my choice. And this is mine. Cal studied her across the table. Clara could almost see him deciding whether to mistake her fairness for weakness. He did not. 6 acres, he said. Next year we measure again. They shook hands. When the first thaw softened the yard, he brought a tractor with a box blade and reshaped the worst section of lane before moving equipment to the south field. The lease required him to maintain only the portion his machinery used, but he continued past the turnoff far enough to improve drainage near the packing shed. Clara walked out and waited beside the tractor until he shut it down. That section isn't in the agreement. Water from my section ends up there, some of it. You want me to put the mud back? I want an invoice. For 20 minutes? Yes. He stared at her. She stared back. Fine, he said. 20 minutes of grading. I'll charge you 1 cup of coffee. That's barter. Ruth will need paperwork. Make it 2 cups and don't tell her. They drank coffee at the card table while mud dried on Cal's boots. He told Clara the barn could survive another season if the tarp held and if no more roofing tore loose. Repairing the damaged bay properly would cost far more than the building currently justified. So I leave it ugly, Clara said. You leave it standing and keep people out. The packing shed? Different problem. That beam needs replacement, but the walls and slab are good. Roof metal is tired, not failed. What would you use it for? If it were mine? It isn't. Cal accepted the correction. Storage. Sorting. Washing fruit if you add plumbing and meet whatever rules apply to what you sell. But don't build a business before you have apples. I'm not. You cleaned it. I swept. You labeled the crates. I was counting them. People who say they're counting crates are often thinking about businesses. Clara recognized her own argument with Walt and gave Cal a narrow look. He smiled into the fisherman mug. She hired Cal for 4 half-days of orchard assessment and instruction. He tried to name a neighbor's rate, lower than his own, but Clara had already priced consulting work through the County Growers Association. I'm not charging you that, he said. Then I'll hire somebody else. Who? I have a list. You made a list before you called me? I made it while you were talking. He charged her a reduced professional rate on the condition that she perform no ladder work alone and accept that teaching slowed him down. They began with the lower rows. Cal marked trees with 3 colors of biodegradable tape. Remove, assess later, and possible restoration. Red accumulated quickly. Dead, he said, tying tape around one trunk. It leafed at the top last year. Water sprouts. Main structure's gone. The next tree had a broad shape and a low branch that curved almost to the ground. Clara could imagine a chair beneath it in summer. Cal cut into a blackened limb and showed her the discolored wood. Cankers in the scaffold branches. Could we cut those out? You'd remove most of the tree and spend years waiting to discover you should have removed the rest. It looks healthy from this side. Disease doesn't care which side you photograph. Clara put her hand against the bark. It was rough and cold, with lichen spreading like pale green maps. Red, she said. Cal tied the tape. By the end of the first day, they had marked 62 trees for removal and only 11 as strong restoration candidates. Another 28 received yellow tape. Clara's shoulders ached from carrying brush, and her boots were packed with mud. She had not climbed, lifted logs, or used a saw, yet the orchard had exhausted her. How did Daniel's parents do 12 acres, she asked, with hired crews, seasonal help, 2 tractors, 3 bad decisions a week, and bodies 30 years younger than ours. Ours. I'm 72. You told me you could count. I didn't say I liked the total. Clara paid a licensed tree crew to remove the most hazardous trees near the house and packing shed. For the orchard rows, she negotiated a staged job. Diseased wood first, accessible removals next, and the remote rows postponed. The crew chipped smaller limbs and left usable logs stacked where Cal said they would not interfere with equipment. The invoice consumed what remained of the money Clara had once assigned to painting the farmhouse. White flakes continued to fall from the siding whenever wind struck it. Clara learned not to look up when they passed the windows. Doreen came on a Saturday with work gloves, 2 thermoses, and 3 retired cafeteria employees Clara had not seen since Daniel's final hospitalization. All were adults old enough to know that enthusiasm was not a substitute for joint support. "We are not cutting trees," Clara told them. Doreen held up both hands. "We were promised no machinery." "You were promised lunch," said Gloria Santos, who had run the baking station for 11 years. The rest was implied. They cleared discarded crates from the packing shed, washed the sorting table, pulled dead vines from the exterior wall, and gathered loose trash from around the buildings. Clara assigned tasks based on knees, backs, and temperament. She kept Gloria away from the latter because Gloria regarded safety instructions as personal criticism. She put Doreen in charge of deciding which crates were sound enough to keep. Doreen saved almost all of them. "You are emotionally compromised by containers," Clara said. "They have character. They have rot." One corner. At noon, Clara served vegetable soup, ham sandwiches, and apple cake she had bought from a local bakery because her kitchen still lacked reliable counter space. She packed leftovers for everyone before they could protest. "You don't have to feed us like a work crew," Gloria said. "You worked. We're your friends. The 2 conditions can coexist." After lunch, Gloria inspected the farm ledger while Clara helped Doreen stack usable crates. "You're undercounting your own time," Gloria called. "My time doesn't go in the expense column. It does if you want to know whether something makes money." Clara turned. "Nothing is making money. Then you especially need to count it." That night, she added a column labeled Clara Hours. The first entry was embarrassing. Between contractor meetings, cleaning, bookkeeping, orchard assessment, and repair errands, she had worked 31 hours that week without producing a thing she could sell. She kept the column. Warmer mornings brought water to the ruts and buds to the strongest apple trees. Cal showed her how to distinguish fruiting wood from the upright shoots that consumed energy without helping the tree. He made the first pruning cuts. Clara followed on low branches using clean hand tools, stopping every hour whether she wanted to or not. She restored only the roughs they had chosen. The rest remained tangled behind them, a visible argument against ambition. One afternoon, Cal walked through the block and stopped at the long row with the curved, diseased trees. Red tape fluttered from trunk after trunk. "This row comes out before bloom," he said. "All of it?" "All but 2, and those 2 may follow." Clara looked down the line. From a distance, the row still held the old orchard's shape. Removing it would create an emptiness beside the restored block. Could we wait 1 season? We could also spend money pruning trees we know are infected. I didn't say prune them. Then they spread disease while you admire the silhouette. His bluntness stung because it was meant to. Clara walked to the last tree, where one low branch carried swollen buds. "I've removed enough," she said. Cal stayed several yards away. "That's not an orchard decision." "No. You want me to pretend it is?" She turned toward him. "I want 1 week." "For what?" "To become willing." He nodded once. 1 week. 7 days later, Clara called the tree crew herself. She stood near the packing shed while saws started uphill. The first trunk cracked, leaned, and fell into the wet grass with a sound deeper than she expected. The empty space it left exposed the 2 rows she had chosen to save. By sunset, the diseased row was gone. From the kitchen window, Clara could see fewer trees. She could also see farther. The new view was not prettier. It was more honest. Without the diseased row, Clara could see the uneven ground, the leaning fence, and the restored block standing by itself against acres of neglect. The chosen trees looked smaller now, almost foolishly hopeful. Cal walked the empty strip the next morning, checking stumps. "Crew did clean work," he said. "It looks bare. It is bare. You could pretend not to enjoy being right. I'd need a higher consulting rate." The pruned trees opened their first blossoms during a week of warm afternoons. Pale pink buds loosened into white, and the orchard began humming with insects. Clara stood beneath one of the stronger trees and watched petals move in the breeze. She had expected beauty to make her feel vindicated. Instead, she felt suspicious. "How many become apples?" she asked. Cal examined a cluster. "Some. That's not a number. Nature dislikes budgets. Nature has never managed a cafeteria. Nature also doesn't care if you complain to the superintendent." He showed her how to look for healthy centers and insect damage. Some blossoms had browned before opening. Others were clean. Pollination would vary from tree to tree, and the forecast showed 2 nights close to freezing. "Do we do anything?" Clara asked. "Commercial blocks use wind machines, heaters, water systems. None make sense for this size. So we wait. We wait intelligently. What does that look like? Check the low spots after the cold night. Don't spend $1,200 trying to save $900 of fruit. The temperature dropped to 29 degrees. Clara woke at 3 and stood at the kitchen window in her robe. Frost silvered the yard. Moonlight caught the farmhouse left edge of the lane and the packing shed roof, then disappeared behind cloud. She could not see the blossoms uphill. For 42 years, action had been her answer to fear. If Daniel's breathing changed, she checked his oxygen. If a cafeteria freezer warmed, she moved the food. If the checking account thinned, she postponed something. There was nothing useful to do for the trees. She made tea and returned to bed. In the morning, Cal cut open blossoms from the lowest rows. Their centers had turned brown. Higher on the slope, more remained green. "Lost, maybe a third," he said. Clara looked downhill where cold air had settled against the trees. Could be worse? Always. Could be better? Usually. She wrote the loss in her orchard notes and did not assign it a dollar value she could not defend. The lease payment arrived in May. Cal delivered the check with a statement showing 6 acres, the agreed rate, and his lime application record. Clara deposited it into a separate farm account. She paid the property taxes from that account and covered the remaining balance herself. The transaction did not feel dramatic. That was why it mattered. The land had paid part of its own obligation without asking Clara to lift anything heavier than a pen. The same week, the permanent repair to the packing shed beam came in $800 above Walt's estimate after he uncovered splitting near one end. "You want me to stop?" he asked. Clara stood beneath the open section of roof, looking at the damaged timber. "If you stop, what happens? I put the temporary brace back and charge for what we did. How long does that buy me?" He raised one shoulder. "A season, maybe 2. Depends on snow." She approved the repair and moved gutter replacement to the following spring. When the work was finished, the roof line looked almost exactly as it had before. The only visible change inside was a clean beam where the old one had been and 2 empty circles on the concrete where the temporary posts had stood. Doreen walked around it twice. "You paid how much for less wood?" "For the roof not to fall. I suppose collapse would affect resale." "I'm not selling." "I know. I wanted to hear you say it." Clara did not give her the satisfaction of smiling. The fruit that survived frost began as hard green knobs. There was less of it than Clara had imagined during bloom, but still enough that Cal made her thin clusters by hand. "You want me to remove healthy apples?" she asked. "You want branches to carry the rest. This feels inefficient. It's the difference between 7 small, bad apples and 2 decent ones." She removed the smallest fruit, damaged fruit, and crowded clusters from branches she could reach safely. Cal handled higher work with a platform attached to his tractor. Clara paid him and recorded the expense beside her own hours. By mid-June, her labor column had become the largest one in the ledger. Gloria Santos arrived with a banker's box full of invoices and a request. "You said you'd look at my catering costs. I said I'd help organize them. That's what look means when I'm asking for free labor." Clara carried the box to the card table. Inside were grocery receipts, supply invoices, handwritten menus, and envelopes labeled "Tax Important" and "Tax May Be Important." You have 3 years mixed together. They were together in life. Life isn't deductible. Gloria's catering operation occupied a licensed commercial kitchen inside a former union hall. She handled office lunches, memorial receptions, and holiday trays, but her purchasing records had grown confused as prices rose. Clara spent 3 afternoons separating ingredients from supplies, assigning costs to menu items, and showing Gloria where her most popular sandwich tray lost money. "I sell a lot of those," Gloria protested. "You lose a lot, repeatedly. What if I charge $5 more? You still lose, only with greater confidence." They rebuilt the menu pricing. In exchange, Gloria offered Clara scheduled use of the kitchen during slow hours if the apples justified preserves, with ingredients, labels, and labor accounted for separately. "No vague favors," Clara said. "I survived 17 years under you." "I know." They wrote an agreement on Gloria's letterhead and sent it to Ruth. Ruth called after reading it. "You know I'm a probate lawyer, not the legal department for every jar of jam in northeastern Ohio. Do you see a problem?" "I see 6, which is fewer than usual. You need insurance confirmation, food label compliance, and a clear arrangement about sales. Also, preserves don't become profitable because friends like them. I haven't made any." "Good. You're already ahead of most small businesses." Ruth came to the farm the following Saturday carrying a pie from a bakery and wearing shoes entirely unsuited to wet grass. "You own boots," Clara said. "I own dignity. You're sinking." Ruth stepped onto a board beside the kitchen door and inspected the new steps, repaired floor, and filtered water. She had not visited since the early contractor meetings. Clara watched her register the curtains in the front room, the shelves Doreen's husband had installed, and the card table still serving as dining furniture. "It looks like a person lives here," Ruth said. "A very underfurnished person. Furniture breeds too. Give it time." They drank coffee on folding chairs outside the packing shed. Cal's field showed even green rows. The restored orchard rose behind them, leaves thick enough to hide most fruit. Ruth looked toward the barn tarp. Still there. "I check it after every storm. You check it or climb onto the barn. I own binoculars." "Good." Clara cut the pie. "How long did you think I'd last?" Ruth took longer to answer than politeness allowed. "I thought you might make the house habitable and sell within a year." Cal thought the same. Cal thinks weather is personal. He thinks optimism is a fungus. Is he wrong? Clara handed her a plate, often enough to stay interesting. Ruth looked at her over the pie. "You know you don't have to make the farm prove the settlement was wise. What does that mean? It means you're allowed to change your mind without handing Mark a victory." Clara watched wind move through the orchard leaves. "I know." "Do you?" "Yes. That's why I'm keeping the labor column." By July, insects had marked some fruit, deer had browsed 2 low trees, and one yellow tape tree declined so sharply that Cal moved it to the removal list. Clara did not ask for a week. They walked the restoration block with clipboards and counted conservatively. Cal estimated that if weather held and loss remained ordinary, Clara might harvest 40 to 50 bushels of saleable apples, with another portion suitable for processing. "That sounds like a lot," she said. "It sounds like less when you're picking. What's the wholesale value?" He gave her a range that barely exceeded the season's orchard expenses. "And if I sell some directly?" "You need customers, containers, sorting, time, and a reason they drive past somebody else's apples. The reason could be mine are closer." "To who?" He introduced her to Anita Greer, who operated a year-round produce market near the state route. Anita was 58, brisk, and unimpressed by stories attached to food. "Customers buy good apples," she said, examining photographs of the trees on Clara's phone. "They may listen to your farm history while they do it, but history doesn't make bruises disappear. What varieties sell?" "Recognizable ones. Good eating apples. Baking apples if you label them clearly. Odd old varieties can move in small amounts if they taste good. We're not certain what I have." "Then bring samples before harvest. I won't promise shelf space until I see fruit." Clara liked her immediately. They discussed wholesale pricing, consignment, packaging, delivery, rejected produce, and payment schedules. Anita made no generous offer. She gave Clara a business card and told her not to pick immature fruit because impatience tasted like starch. Back at the farm, Clara added market containers, labels, fuel, kitchen time, and potential spoilage to her projections. The profit shrank. The plan improved. Late in August, the first apples colored high in the trees. Not enough to pick, Cal warned. Another week, maybe 2. Clara waited 4 days before cutting one open. It was firm, pale-fleshed, and sharp enough to tighten her jaw. Beneath the sharpness was a clean sweetness. Cal took a slice. "Still early," he said. "I know." He chewed, then cut another. Clara noticed and said nothing. That evening, she carried one apple into the house and placed it beside the farm ledger. It was mottled, undersized, and marked near the stem. She did not polish it into something it wasn't. The apple stayed beside the ledger for 3 days, softening from evidence into fruit. Clara finally sliced away the bruised spot and ate it over the sink. Harvest began with the trees Cal believed were Jonathan's. Anita tasted samples from 6 trees, rejected 2 as too soft, and accepted 4 for a trial delivery. "These sort as utility grade unless appearance improves," she said. "They taste better than utility. People shop with their eyes before their mouths. What if I offer samples? At my market, with my approval, during assigned hours." "Of course." Anita looked almost disappointed not to have an argument. Clara bought 40 new half-bushel boxes because Cal advised against risking more. The boxes arrived flat. She assembled them at the sorting table while Doreen stamped labels with the farm address and variety followed by a cautious question mark. "You need a name," Doreen said. "The property has one. Mercer Farm sounds like Mark owns it." Clara pressed a box corner into place. "The deed disagrees." "What about Clara's orchard?" "No. Second chance apples." "Absolutely not. Forgotten farm. It was neglected, not misplaced." Doreen turned the stamp pad around. "You're difficult to brand. I'm not branding myself. They used Mercer Farm for the first run because it appeared on the old tax records and cost nothing to invent." Cal brought 2 experienced pickers from his crew, both adults with their own ladders, bags, and workers' compensation coverage, through his operation. Clara paid the billed labor. She handled ground-level fruit and sorting, stopping when her hands began to cramp. The first full box weighed more than she should carry. She slid it along the table and asked for help without pretending she had intended to. Fruit came in 3 categories: marketable, processing, and ground. The ground pile grew fastest after a windy night knocked down nearly a quarter of one tree. Some apples went to a cider operator who paid by weight at a price barely worth the fuel. Some went into compost. Clara kept nothing merely because losing it felt disrespectful. At Anita's market, her first delivery occupied 2 wooden crates near the end of the apple display. Perfect red fruit from a commercial orchard filled 6 bins beside them. Clara's apples looked like relatives who had arrived in work clothes. Anita set out slices on a covered sample tray. "Don't tell customers they're ugly," she instructed. "I was going to say honest. Don't tell them that either. Apples aren't politicians." A woman in her 70s sampled a slice, chewed thoughtfully, and bought 4. A restaurant cook asked whether Clara could supply 10 bushels every week. She said no. "How many can you supply?" 2 next week, assuming the next block sorts well." He lost interest. Clara felt the refusal as a missed opportunity until Anita leaned toward her. "Good answer," she said. "New growers promise 10 and arrive with 3. By closing, 23 pounds had sold. The amount due to Clara after Anita's percentage would not cover the picking labor for that morning. The next delivery sold faster. Anita moved the crates closer to the entrance and added a handwritten card. "Local Old Orchard Jonathan's. Tart, crisp, good for pie." Clara did not object to Old Orchard. The trees had earned the adjective. Processing fruit went to Gloria's licensed kitchen in weighed batches. They tested apple butter and a spiced preserve, recording sugar, jars, lids, kitchen time, energy estimates, and their own labor. Gloria tasted the first batch and closed her eyes. "That's excellent." It cost $8.70 a jar. Gloria opened her eyes. That's terrible. They reduced batch time, bought jars by the case, adjusted the recipe without compromising food safety, and priced the finished product through Anita's market. Clara refused to hide labor under a friendship column. Gloria received a kitchen use fee and a share for the hours she worked. Clara paid herself only on paper for the first season, but the cost remained visible. Your labels are boring, Gloria said. They contain what they need. They look like tax notices. Tax notices are widely read. The second label included a small line drawing of an apple, which Gloria considered a victory. The harvest lasted 5 weeks. It yielded less fruit than Cal's optimistic estimate and slightly more than his pessimistic one. 43 bushels were marketable. 17 went to processing or cider. The rest fed compost, wildlife, and Clara's education. After boxes, labor, spray, pruning instruction, market fees, kitchen time, ingredients, fuel, and spoilage, the orchard produced a modest positive number. It covered that season's operating expenses and contributed several $100s toward the portion of property tax the lease had not paid. It did not repay tree removal, structural repairs, or Clara's hours. She closed the ledger and allowed herself 1 glass of wine. Cal found her in the packing shed the next morning, reviewing the figures again. You'll change the answer if you stare long enough, he said. I'm checking my formulas. Did it make money? The operating side did. How much? Clara showed him. He nodded. That's respectable. It's small. Small things can be respectable. Is that your orchard philosophy? It's my bank account philosophy. She poured him coffee. They drank beside the open doors while dry leaves moved across the lane. The restored block had thinned to yellow and rust. Behind it, neglected rows rose dark toward the ridge. Next year, we could add the yellow-taped section, Clara said. We could assess it. That sounded careful. I've been exposed to paperwork. A county envelope arrived that afternoon, addressed jointly to the estate representative and Clara as the new owner. It contained a corrected property tax proration statement following the recorded transfer. The amount was small. Ruth explained it over the phone and told Clara no action was needed beyond keeping the copy. Mark called before Clara could file it. What did you do to the agricultural classification? He asked. Hello, Mark. The statement changed. The parcel changed owners. It shows a different proration than the settlement worksheet, by $86. It's not the amount. I don't want the estate responsible for future taxes. It isn't. How do you know? Because I asked Ruth instead of calling you. Elaine's voice sounded faintly behind him. I told you. Mark covered the phone badly. Clara heard fabric scrape and 2 muffled words. We have the original document, he said. We'll bring it out so you can compare. Mail it to Ruth. Elaine wants to see the place. Clara looked through the kitchen window toward the packing shed, where boxes waited to be flattened for recycling. Tomorrow at 2, she said. Not before. They arrived at 1:48. Clara watched their car stop outside the gate. Mark got out and studied the chain as if the property had personally inconvenienced him. Elaine remained in the passenger seat until Clara walked down with the key. The gate opened more easily now. Cal's grading had improved the ruts, and crushed stone covered the wettest section. You could have driven in, Mark said. You could have waited 12 minutes. Elaine stepped out. Her gaze traveled down the lane to the farmhouse on the left, the packing shed in the center, and the barn on the right with its tarp still secured over one bay. It looks different, she said. It's drier. Mark looked toward the orchard. You cut down half the trees. Not half. Dad wouldn't have wanted that. The claim was so quick and confident that Clara almost admired it. Your father left them unpruned for 28 years. He didn't have time to manage this place. No, Clara said. He had choices. Elaine touched Mark's sleeve. We came about the tax paper. Clara led them into the packing shed. The concrete floor had been swept. Empty market boxes stood stacked against one wall. Cleaned sorting tables occupied the center, and harvest invoices lay arranged beside Clara's ledger. A hand-washing sink had been estimated but not yet installed. The permanent roof beam crossed overhead, plain and solid. Mark walked to the open rear doorway. From there, he could see Cal's leased field and the cleared orchard rows. "You're farming it?" "Cal leases 6 acres. I'm restoring a small block of trees." "And selling apples?" "Yes." "To who?" "A local market." He looked at the invoices, then at the repaired beam, as if searching for the trick. Elaine picked up one of the remaining preserve jars. "You made this with Gloria in her licensed kitchen. You always hated canning." "I hated canning in August without air conditioning." Mark opened the tax envelope and placed the county statement beside Clara's ledger. She showed him the corrected proration, Ruth's email, and the line proving the estate had no future liability. He read it twice. "So that's it?" he asked. "That's it." He folded the page along the wrong crease. Outside, a truck moved across Cal's field, sunlight flashing on the cab. Mark watched it through the doorway. "This place was never worth this much when Dad owned it," he said. The words held accusation, bewilderment, and something near grief. Clara understood what he saw, not wealth. Evidence of decisions his father had postponed, and a woman he had assumed could not make them. "The land was worth what it was worth," she said. "But value isn't something land, or a person, simply possesses while being neglected. It has to be recognized, supported, and worked for." Elaine lowered her eyes. Mark's face closed. "You think this proves something about us?" "No. I think it proves something to me." He returned the paper to the envelope. They walked through the farmhouse before leaving. Clara showed them the repaired kitchen floor, the safe steps, and the front room where 2 mismatched armchairs faced the window. She did not show them the farm ledger again. At the kitchen sink, Elaine picked up Daniel's fisherman mug. "I remember this," she said. "He never fished," Mark replied. "Not after you were grown." "He didn't before." Clara dried her hands. He liked the mug more than the activity. Elaine set it down carefully. At the gate, Mark said the tax issue seemed resolved. Elaine hugged Clara with one arm, an awkward, brief contact that Clara returned after a moment. Their car backed onto the county road and drove away. Clara closed the gate. She did not feel victorious. She felt tired, relieved, and unexpectedly sad that the only visit Daniel's children might ever make to the farm had required an $86 discrepancy. When she returned to the packing shed, the preserve jar Elaine had handled was missing. On the sorting table lay a $5 bill. The jar sold for $6. Clara entered the difference under family discount. The first snow covered the orchard before Clara finished reconciling the season's sales tax. She watched flakes soften the empty row and bury the stumps one by one. The restored trees became black lines against white ground. Beyond them, acres she had not touched disappeared beneath the same snow, briefly equal. Her ledger was less forgiving. The orchard had paid its operating costs, but only because Clara counted capital repairs separately and assigned no actual payment to most of her own hours. Preserves had produced a better margin than wholesale apples, though not enough to justify expanding without more fruit. The lease remained the farm's most dependable income. Her pension and Social Security remained hers. That last fact mattered. The farm did not have to feed her by itself. It had to stop consuming more than she could safely give it. Cal came by with the revised lease calculation for the next year. The measured acreage increased the rent, while his documented lime expense remained his responsibility. "You didn't need to show me the application invoice," Clara said. "The lease says document amendments. It says soil amendments. That's what I meant. You overpaid for lime. Get your own field." "I have one. You're standing in it." He took the invoice back with dignity. The barn tarp survived the first 2 snows and tore at one corner during the third. Cal's crew refastened it from outside the dangerous bay. Clara paid the labor charge without argument, which made Cal check her forehead as if testing for fever. "I budgeted it," she said. "That explains the lack of pain?" It moves the pain into an existing category. January brought a larger pain. The furnace began making a new sound, not the familiar grumble, but a low pulsing beneath the floor. Clara shut it down, called the technician, and spent the morning in her coat beside an electric heater. The technician removed a panel, inspected the heat exchanger, and came upstairs with soot on his wrist. "I can't certify this safe. Can you repair it?" "I can replace the failed section if I find the part, but the rest of the unit is the same age. You'd be paying to preserve an argument." The replacement estimate consumed most of the money Clara had reserved for spring gutters, 2 windows, and limited barn work. She called 3 companies, requested comparable proposals, and asked Ruth to examine the financing terms on one. Ruth found a prepayment penalty buried in the contract. "You are very good at finding bad sentences," Clara said. "It's the profession." Clara chose a smaller, high-efficiency furnace without the expensive cooling package 2 salesmen insisted would transform her life. She paid partly from savings and partly through a short manufacturer loan with no penalty for early payment. The farmhouse stayed cold for 4 days. Doreen demanded Clara sleep at her house. "I have heaters. You have 1 heater in a 100-year-old house. I have 2. Wonderful. They can testify together at the fire investigation." Clara spent 3 nights in Doreen's guest room beneath a framed cross-stitch that said, "Friends are the family we choose." Doreen apologized for it twice. "My sister made that in 1987. It's very direct." She was going through a divorce. Did she run out of fabric before the rest of the thought? On the 4th day, the new furnace came on quietly. Clara stood over a floor register, feeling warm air rise around her hands. It did not thud, rumble, or require interpretation. She missed the old sound for approximately 10 minutes. The unexpected cost changed the spring plan. Gutters still mattered because bad drainage threatened repairs already made. 2 upstairs windows could wait. Barn work shrank to inspection and stabilization. Clara postponed adding more orchard rows until Cal's assessment showed whether the current block had survived winter well. "You're allowed 1 new row," he said after they walked the trees in March. 1. Maybe 2 if the labor estimate stays low. "Last year you told me not to expand. Last year you didn't know a fruit bud from a water sprout. And now? Now you're dangerous enough to ask better questions." They added 1 row. Clara hired the same crew for heavy pruning and removal. She did reachable work, timed herself, and stopped before fatigue changed the quality of her cuts. Her hours fell even as the maintained block grew slightly. When blossoms opened, she did not count apples before pollination. When frost threatened, she checked the forecast once and went to bed. Cal noticed. "Losing your anxiety?" he asked. "I scheduled it for June." The spring cleanup drew the same retired cafeteria group, plus Ruth, who arrived in proper boots this time. "I have surrendered dignity," she announced. "You bought those yesterday," Clara said. "The soles are clean. They won't be." They cleaned the packing shed, painted the repaired beam, and installed sturdy shelving built by Doreen's husband. Gloria brought lunch from her catering kitchen and presented Clara with an invoice marked, "Paid by 3 years of corrected sandwich prices." Clara examined it. "This is not an approved accounting category. Eat your potato salad." After lunch, Ruth used a paint pen to mark storage bins, while Doreen argued that 1 crate with a missing slat still had character. Cal appeared in the doorway, saw 8 adults debating a rotten crate, and backed out. "You're not escaping," Clara called. "There's food." I sensed organization. "That's why you're safe." He stayed. The moment was ordinary enough that Clara almost missed it. People occupied the shed without waiting for instructions from her. Ruth and Gloria disagreed over labels. Doreen's husband adjusted a shelf. Cal ate potato salad beside Walt, whom he had once accused of overcharging for lumber. Nobody had arrived to save Clara, and nobody was being managed into gratitude. They had come because the work mattered to them in different ways, and because Clara would come when theirs did. In June, she spent 2 evenings rebuilding Gloria's supplier comparison after a distributor raised prices. In July, she drove Ruth home from an outpatient eye procedure and stayed long enough to warm soup, though Ruth insisted she could read the microwave buttons while dilated. In August, Clara helped Cal reconcile chemical records after his foreman left for another job. She found 3 duplicate entries and 1 treatment applied to the wrong block on paper. "You save everything?" Cal asked, watching her match invoices. "Only useful things." He looked at her, then at the neat stacks. "People too?" The question came lightly, but it stayed between them. "I'm trying to stop sorting people that way," she said. Cal nodded as if she had answered something else. The second harvest was larger without becoming overwhelming. The restored block produced better-looking fruit, and Anita accepted more at a higher grade. Clara expanded preserves only to the capacity already available in Gloria's kitchen. When Anita suggested a holiday gift box, Clara calculated packaging, labor, and spoilage before agreeing to 50 boxes. "Only 50?" Anita asked. "Only 50. I could probably sell 80. You can definitely sell 50. Anita smiled. "You're learning retail. I'm resisting it. The holiday order sold out." Clara declined to make more. Her net orchard income increased. The lease covered the property taxes. Preserves and apples paid operating expenses and contributed toward the furnace loan. The numbers did not sparkle, but they repeated. Dependability, Clara discovered, was a quiet form of wealth. The farmhouse improved at the same pace. New gutters directed rain away from the repaired sill. One upstairs bedroom received safe wiring and a replacement window, making it usable for guests. The front porch remained partly closed, but safe steps and a small landing served the kitchen entrance. Clara hired someone to scrape and paint only the worst exterior wall. The remaining peeling paint offended Doreen. "Next year," Clara said. "You said that last year. And look how well it waited." Elaine called occasionally. Their conversations remained careful and short. She asked about the orchard without pretending expertise. Clara asked whether Mark was well without asking what he said about her. One evening, Elaine mentioned that the house had sold. "Closing is next month," she said. Clara sat at the card table looking at the blank wall where a proper dining table ought to be. "Did you get what you wanted?" "It sold for less than Mark expected. That wasn't my question." Elaine was quiet. "I don't know," she said. Clara understood the answer well enough not to improve it. She received a forwarded envelope containing mail addressed to Daniel and a note in Elaine's handwriting. "Thought you should decide." Inside was a renewal request from a fishing magazine Daniel had not subscribed to in 7 years. Clara tore it in half and recycled it. The sale closed without further conversation. 2 weeks later, a delivery truck came down the farm lane. Clara assumed it carried the replacement orchard boxes she had ordered. Instead, 2 men stepped from the cab and opened the rear door. The maple dining table lay inside with its legs wrapped separately in moving blankets. 4 chairs stood strapped beside it. "Delivery for Clara Mercer," one man said. "From whom?" He checked his paper. "Elaine Mercer. Is there a note?" "Not that I've got." Clara called Elaine while the men waited. Elaine answered on the 4th ring. "The table is here." "Yes. Why?" "It didn't fit." "In what?" A pause. "My dining room." Clara pictured Elaine measuring a space where she had never intended to put the table. "Did Mark agree?" "It was part of my share." "That still isn't an explanation." "No," Elaine said. "It isn't." Clara could have made her say more. She could have demanded the apology, hidden badly inside freight charges and moving blankets. Instead, she looked through the packing shed doorway toward the farmhouse. The table would fit in the dining room, though the card table, farm ledgers, and 2 shelves would have to move. "Thank you," Clara said. Elaine exhaled. "You're welcome." The delivery men carried the tabletop through the kitchen door. One recognized the old estate sale construction and said they did not make them that solid anymore. Clara almost told him about the station wagon and the whistling clothesline. She let the memory remain hers. When the legs were attached, the table stood in the farmhouse dining room with the same scratch across one corner and the same faded place in the finish. It looked both too large and exactly right. Clara placed her hand flat on the maple surface. For years, she had served everyone else at that table. Now she opened the farm ledger, sat at its head, and decided who to invite. The invitation list filled one page of the farm ledger because Clara wrote notes beside each name. Doreen and her husband. Bring folding chairs. Gloria. Nothing requiring oven space. Ruth. Directions again, although Ruth had visited 4 times and continued to distrust roads without painted lines. Walt. Ask whether his shoulder allowed stairs. Then remember, dinner was downstairs. Anita. No market talk unless she started it. Cal's name required no note. He would arrive early, bring something nobody requested, and inspect whichever repair Clara least wanted discussed. The supper would mark the end of the second harvest and the return of the table, though Clara refused to call it a celebration until she had closed the season's accounts. She spent 2 mornings checking invoices. Apples had sold steadily. Preserves did better, particularly the spiced jars in Anita's 50 holiday boxes. The expanded row had added fruit without forcing Clara to hire another full crew. Waste fell because she picked in smaller batches and delivered more frequently. The orchard's profit remained modest. It covered its operating expenses, the balance of the property tax not covered by Cal's lease, and 3 extra payments on the furnace loan. The farm account ended the year with a reserve large enough to handle ordinary spring work without reaching into Clara's personal emergency savings. She ran the calculation again. Then she called Gloria. It worked, Clara said. The holiday boxes, the year. There was silence at the other end. Say that again, Gloria said. I'm not making a speech. Say it slowly so I can enjoy it. The farm covered what it was supposed to cover. And paid you for your time? Not fully. Then we're not finished. No, we're not. That was part of why it worked. Nothing had to be finished. Cal reviewed the orchard plan for the coming season at the packing shed table. He recommended no additional rows. Clara waited for the argument hidden inside the advice. That's it? She asked. That's what? You aren't going to tell me I'm overreaching? You're not. Could we restore one more? We could. Should we? No. She tapped her pencil against the plan. Anita says she can take more. Anita doesn't prune. Gloria can use more processing fruit. Gloria doesn't spray. So we hold here. We hold here until the trees prove they can repeat the crop, and you prove you can repeat the labor. Clara looked at her hours column. She had reduced her time without reducing quality, but harvest weeks still left her hands stiff each morning. All right, she said. Cal seemed almost disappointed by the lack of resistance. What about the far yellow block? She asked. Leave it. For how long? Until leaving it stops being a decision. She wrote leave under the block number. The barn required a similar answer. A structural contractor declared the damaged north bay unsuitable for storage, but said the rest could remain stable if Clara closed off access, replaced 2 braces, and kept water away from the foundation. Full restoration would cost more than several years of projected farm income. Clara authorized the braces, drainage work, and a locked interior barrier. The tarp remained visible from the lane. Doreen disliked it. It makes the place look unfinished. It is unfinished. People can see it. People can see the peeling paint, too. I'm offering a complete experience. Doreen stood in the yard with her hands on her hips. You used to care what people thought. I used to think their thoughts came with invoices. Some do. I file those. A letter from the probate court arrived while Clara was setting the supper table. Ruth had warned her it was coming. The estate's final accounting had been accepted, and the remaining administrative matters were closed. Clara read the notice standing beside the kitchen sink. The document was dry and orderly. It listed dates, acknowledged distributions, and reduced the end of Daniel's estate to language no one would remember. She felt grief rise in a form she had not expected. Not grief for the house, not grief for the disputed furniture or the money spent on lawyers. Grief for the husband who had been present in 1,000 small kindnesses and absent from the decision that had shaped Clara's life after him. The contradiction had never resolved. Daniel had loved her. Daniel had failed her. One truth did not erase the other, and Clara no longer needed to choose which one she was allowed to keep. She folded the notice and placed it in the cabinet where she stored farm insurance, tax records, and the settlement agreement. It belonged with the papers, not beside his watch. The watch lay in her bedroom drawer. She had wound it twice after Elaine returned it, then stopped. It still kept time when she chose to start it. A small envelope arrived from Elaine the next day. Inside was a $1 bill and a note. The preserve was worth $6. Mark ate half and said it needed less cinnamon. He was wrong. Clara read it twice. She entered the dollar in the farm ledger under preserve sales. In the notes column, she wrote balance paid. There was no apology from Mark. There was no second visit, no confession that he had mistaken efficiency for fairness, and no admission that seeing leased ground and repaired rooms had unsettled him. Elaine never described what he said after they left the farm. She only mentioned once that he had kept Clara's market label on the empty jar. Clara did not build forgiveness out of evidence too thin to carry it. She sent Elaine 2 jars from the next batch with an invoice for $12. At the bottom she wrote, "Cinnamon unchanged." Elaine paid in full. On the afternoon of the supper, cold rain darkened the lane and faded into mist, much as it had on Clara's first visit. The rust-red gate shone wet beside the road. Bare orchard rows climbed behind the farmhouse, packing shed and barn. Clara wore her faded olive raincoat while carrying a box from the shed to the kitchen. It had been patched at one pocket, and the hem retained a stain no cleaner had removed. Her brown boots were no longer the only suitable footwear she owned, but they remained the pair by the door. She stopped at the gate with one hand on the cold metal. From there, the layout had not changed. The white farmhouse stood on the left. The red barn sat farther back on the right, still imperfect beneath its secured tarp. The packing shed remained between them, plain and useful. The lane ran straight through wet ground toward the house, but the porch had safe steps. Gutters held clean lines beneath the eaves. Cal's leased field lay cut and orderly beyond the shed. The orchard behind the buildings showed open space where diseased trees had been removed and deliberate rows where sound ones remained. An amber light burned in the farmhouse window. Clara remembered Ruth standing beside the sedan, allowing her to stare at a choice that looked like ruin. At the time, Clara had believed she was deciding whether she could save the farm. She understood now that saving had been the wrong word. She had assessed it, limited it, paid for what mattered, refused what did not, asked for help, hired expertise, returned favors, changed plans, and left entire acres alone. The gate no longer felt like the edge of somebody else's property. A horn sounded behind her. Ruth's sedan waited on the county road. Clara opened the gate and waved her through. "You could install something automatic," Ruth called through the lowered window. "I could also hire a gate attorney. More expensive. Less reliable? Certainly." By 5, the dining room was full of mismatched chairs. Doreen's husband had brought 4. Walt carried in a wooden chair he claimed could hold anyone under 400 pounds. Anita arrived with bread, Gloria with potatoes, despite Clara's instruction, and Cal with 2 bottles of wine and an apple pie from the same gas station bakery Ruth distrusted. Ruth examined the pie box. "This has been traveling since the previous century. It'll match your peppermints," Cal said. The maple table held everyone. Its scratched corner faced the kitchen. One faded place in the finish showed where Daniel had rested his forearms for years. Clara had considered refinishing it, then decided the surface could remain honest too. She served roast chicken, green beans, potatoes, and apple chutney from Gloria's kitchen. The food was good, though the chicken took longer than planned and the first batch of gravy developed lumps. Doreen tried to take the whisk. "I can fix it," Clara said. "I know. Sit down. I'm finishing. You have finished for 42 years. The room quieted just enough for Clara to hear the sentence. Doreen seemed startled by her own words. I meant dinner. I know what you meant. Clara looked at the people around the table. Nobody required her to prove the meal had value by remaining on her feet. Gloria was already pouring water. Ruth had found serving spoons. Cal was cutting bread badly but with confidence. Anita moved the extra chair out of Clara's way. Clara put down the whisk. The gravy remained lumpy. Everyone survived. During dinner, Walt described the farmhouse sill repair in detail until Ruth threatened to bill him for ruining appetites. Gloria announced that her sandwich trays now made a profit. Anita asked whether Clara would consider 60 holiday boxes next year. 55, Clara said. 58, 56, and you pay for the outer cartons. Anita held out her hand across the table. Done. Cal shook his head. You invited work to supper. Only respectable work. After pie, Ruth raised her glass. No speeches, Clara said. This is a legal notice. Then send it by mail. Ruth ignored her. To the first client who ever repaired my lease calculation, rejected my emotional analysis, and made me buy boots. They're still too clean, Doreen said. Everyone drank. Clara did too. Rain ticked softly against the dining room window. The new furnace moved warm air through the floor registers without drama. In the kitchen, Daniel's fisherman mug stood upside down in the drainer beside ordinary cups. The talk continued around Clara, prices, weather, Ruth's dangerous peppermints, Cal's opinion that an automatic gate would fail at the first freeze. No one asked what the farm would someday be worth. No one discussed the house Mark and Elaine had sold or the inheritance divided from it. The value in the room was not waiting for an appraisal. Clara looked down the length of the maple table. For most of her life, care had meant anticipating what everyone else needed before they asked. Here, a bowl reached her from one direction and bread from another. She took both. Outside, the rust-red gate stood closed against the mist. Behind it, the muddy lane led to one weathered farmhouse window, burning amber in the dark. Clara stayed seated while the people she had chosen passed the dishes.